Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today is the August 10, 2023 Planning Commission hearing for the City of Santa Barbara. I will call this hearing to order now at 1:01 p.m. Mrs. Esparza, can we please have roll call?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I'll take roll call. Chair Bonderson,
Yes, here.
Vice Chair Bauke,
Here.
Commissioner Boss,
Present.
Commissioner DeLuccio,
Here.
Commissioner Lodge,
Here.
Commissioner Wardlow is absent, and Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
We have quorum. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So let's get started by reviewing our preliminary matters. Mr. Busk, do we have any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items here today?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. We have none.
All right, thank you. And do we have any announcements or appeals?
Yes, I did just want to let you know that the city attorney for today's meeting will be Dan Henschke. You don't see him in the room because he's joining via Zoom, so he's on by telephone and will be jumping in if you have any questions or if he needs to. Thank you.
Very good. So if any of us need the support of council, we'll just ask for Mr. Henschke. Very good. And next we have the review and consideration of our minutes and resolutions, but it doesn't seem like we have any today, so we'll skip right on forward into public comment. Mrs. Esparza, do we have anyone in person or remote that may like to give public comment for us today on anything that is not on our agenda?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak on general business, that's items not on today's agenda, please fill out a speaker slip in the back of the room. Not seeing any movement, I'll turn to virtual. If there's anyone participating on Zoom who would like to speak on general business, please raise your hand and we can call on you. Not seeing any raised hands, we did receive written correspondence from Ernest Solomon, which was distributed to the commission prior to the meeting. Back to you.
Excellent, thank you. And before we move on into our discussion items today, I'd just like to remind our commission that respect and decorum are always a requirement as part of our hearings. So given that, I will be conducting our hearings in accordance to that continued standard. First, we will move on to item number 3, which is a discussion item today. We'll be receiving an update on the bicycle share pilot program. Very excited about that. We have Associate Transportation Planner Sam Furtner, is that correct?
Furtner, that's
Furtner.
correct.
I'm sorry, I did not roll off my
It's a hard
tongue
one.
as simple as it could have been. But we're happy to have you, sir. Go ahead and give us your presentation.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. So I'm here today with Jessica Grant, Senior Transportation Planner from the Public Works Department. My name is Sam Furtner. I'm the Mobility Coordinator with the Sustainability and Resilience Department. And we're here this afternoon really just to provide an update on progress to date, challenges, where we are with the Bicycle Share Pilot Program. One of the reasons that we wanted to come before you today is it has been quite a while and a lot has changed since we last sat before you. There are new faces on the dais here today, and in the overall realm of bike share, we've learned a lot, and the program as a whole has really evolved from when we last came before you. Back in November of 2020, we came to Planning Commission and received a programmatic coastal development permit for some potential locations in the coastal zone. What we brought at that time is this image on the right of the screen. And I'd just like you to remember this as we move through the presentation to see where we began and ultimately where we ended up today. After Planning Commission, we've gone to numerous boards and commissions. We've gone to City Council multiple times, Sustainability Council Committee, and most recently, back in May of this year, we went to City Council and received approval to extend the pilot program for an additional 3 years. This extension would begin February of 2024 and go to 2027. Should we decide to move forward with a more permanent bike share program at that time, we would be required to file for a new coastal development permit for that permanent program. But with council's blessing back in May, we started the process to extend our coastal development permit for this pilot phase starting in February 2024. So just to step back a little bit and to bring us all up to speed, bike share is really intended to be a point-to-point public transportation option with the potential to reduce traffic and parking demand, It should be a service that can provide access to key destinations, it should be affordable, and it's a great option when it's maybe just a little too far to walk, but also too close to drive. As the program has evolved, we found that bike share really does provide an additional active public transit option here in the city. Bike share came about here in Santa Barbara due to some unregulated and unpermitted shared mobility launches back in 2017, 2018. In response to that, we went to City Council and we received direction that shared mobility does need to be regulated. At this time, we're not interested in a dockless scooter system here in downtown, but we have been asking for bike share here in the city. So let's look into that. And this is really driven from the circulation element of the general plan, which is listed bike share as a great amenity for downtown for over a decade, as well as our 2016 bicycle master plan. The intent of both of those documents is really to see if bike share can provide a sustainable public transportation option here in the city. And that goal also furthers council's goal of meeting carbon neutrality here in Santa Barbara. B-Cycle was selected as a vendor for operation here, mostly due to the platform that they brought. Low profile, more aesthetically pleasing docking system that looks more like a conventional bike rack you might see. They also proposed an all-electric fleet. These are pedal assist bicycles, which means you only get boost while you're actively pedaling. They have a Bosch drivetrain, they have constantly illuminated front and rear lights, and they're really designed for municipal bike share programs. I'd also like to point out here that these B-Cycle bikes are governed to 17 miles per hour, which is lower speed than any off-the-shelf e-bike you would buy in the state of California. Most Class 1s go up to 20 miles an hour with pedal assist, and Class 3s can actually go up to 28 miles an hour, and those are all commercially available in California. So as a user, when you use the B-Cycle system, there's two different ways to interface with the dock and the bike. You can either do it virtually through an app-based approach, use your phone, identify a location, start the process to unlock a bike. Sometimes you need to wake up the dock by pushing a button on the side of the dock. The other way to do it is actually walk up, push a button on the dock to wake it up, and then use an RFID card, which you can have issued from B-Cycle. Scan the card, and at that point the dock will beep, indicating that the bike is ready for checkout. Similarly, at the end of your ride, when you come back to the dock, if you engage the front fork into the dock and push forward a little bit, it will beep, indicating that your ride has been completed. So this is really one of the biggest questions that we get asked about the bike share program, is who rides B-Cycle? And the answer is just about everybody rides B-Cycle. We see residents that are using it occasionally to get downtown or to do errands or to go to, events in more parking congested areas. We see a lot of commuters that are using this regularly throughout the week to get to work in the downtown core. We see tourists using it, and we definitely see people that are interested in buying an e-bike potentially, but maybe have never ridden one before. And so this is kind of a litmus test for them to go out and try a bike, ride it. Not as much commitment as it might be to go buy a $2,000 e-bike. Since we've launched the program and the network has developed a little bit more, we've had more staff time and bandwidth to really work on the development of our low-income program. This was actually just sponsored by Bosch recently, and it's called B-Cycle for All. This program offers a $25 annual membership for low-income residents here in town. And we're starting to see that program take off. Again, we've been focused really on building the network, and now we're hoping to focus more energy into that. Recently as well, B-Cycle has worked with the Santa Barbara Public Library to offer a Library of Things B-Cycle Pass at the downtown location, wherein you can actually check out a B-Cycle membership for a week as a library patron and use it, get to ride it, not worry about those fees, and not worry about the annual membership commitment. And this is just a little aside, but we look at who rides B-Cycle and how they ride B-Cycle, and During Fiesta, what you see on the screen here is a screenshot that the B-Cycle operations manager sent to me. It's from 11 a.m. on Friday, August 4th, so 1 hour before the Fiesta parade. And this doesn't capture the entire downtown area, but what you can see, and this was mimicked on the east side as well, is that every single station on the Mesa, the west side, Upper State Street, and the majority of the east side was empty. Those are residents that are getting to Cabrillo Boulevard to Lower State Street with B-Cycle on a day where parking impacts are expected and driving might be a little bit more onerous. So in also looking at who rides B-Cycle, we try to see how members or single ride users are using this active transportation option. And since launch, we've seen a pretty consistent rate across the board of about 29 to 30% of single ride users and about 70 to 71% now of member trips being taken on B-Cycle bikes. So it's not a perfect breakdown of who's a resident, who's a tourist, but it gives a pretty good indication that we have a lot of regular users on the system. So here we are 2.5 years in. The system statistics from launch have actually been quite impressive. We currently have 520 docks at 87 different locations throughout the city and around 260 pedal assist e-bikes in service. On those bikes, we've seen over 333,000 trips taken, and we're now at 1.1 million miles ridden on the bike share network in 2.5 years. We find these metrics to be promising and really that this supports the notion that this is a viable public transit option. We've also been pleased with B-Cycle as a partner in addressing issues, in collaborating and brainstorming effective solutions. And I'd just like to point out that when we initially moved forward with bike share here in Santa Barbara, we identified a loose approximation of what we hoped to get in Santa Barbara, which is around 250 e-bikes and 500 docks. This estimate was based on similarly sized cities with nice environments like Santa Barbara. What we've seen is we have a lot of demand in this town, and while we have the network really established, there are still some gaps in the network, especially out in the Upper West Side, parts of the Lower Riviera that we would like to see some additional stations located at. So we have the flexibility to do that, and we are working to close those gaps in the network. So compare this slide to the slide that we initially saw with some proposed potential locations in the coastal zone. You can see that we have a lot of density in the downtown area. You can see that we have a good bit of density along Cabrillo area, but also quite a bit of density on the east side, Upper State Street, and we're working on building density in the west side and the Mesa as well. What we found is a pretty linear approach as far as new station installations, new bikes and docks being added, and the number of miles continues to grow. So we monitor overall mileage, and we also look at what stations are performing well and what stations might be underperforming so that we can kind of keep things balanced. Here is a snapshot in time, a heat map showing where people are riding with B-Cycle. This is a 3-month period during winter of this year, so fairly wet. The higher concentrations are shown in white, so you see a lot of traffic along State Street, which is the spine of our bicycle network. You also see a lot of concentration along Cabrillo Boulevard. But what you're also seeing on this is a lot of people going up to the Mesa. So prior to this snapshot, we did not have real good bike share facilities up on the Mesa. It's been very hard to site up there. Narrow sidewalks, poor visibility areas, basically just a lack of real estate. We got a little creative and we put an in-street bike corral in up at Elise Way because we were seeing people ride to the Mesa. And lo and behold, now there are facilities there, we're seeing even more people go up there. So just another reminder that hills are not such a barrier with an e-bike. So people can go a lot of different places they might not go on a conventional bike. Since launch, and out of the over 1.1 million miles ridden on B-Cycle bikes, we've had 5 reported collisions. We do monitor these regularly, and we feel that this low number of collisions is really directly attributable to the fact that these bikes are governed to a lower speed. And they're not as easy to get out of control on as a conventional off-the-shelf e-bike might be. As to pricing, initially we looked at the annual and the monthly approach, and then we rolled out a low-income program. We also have the walk-up rate, which just recently went up to $8 per 30 minutes. We do anticipate some pricing changes likely in the next year, but we still feel that bike share is a cost-effective, affordable approach to public transit here in the city. And the graph on the bottom, you don't need to understand all of it, but I would just like to point out that when looking at how people ride bike share, we see the highest concentrations of single ride usage on the weekends, unsurprisingly, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But we also see that with annual memberships and B-Cycle for All and monthly memberships, that usage is pretty consistent throughout the week, indicating that people are not just using this for getting downtown on Friday night. When we look at the bike share network, we have a very established network here in the city of Santa Barbara, but people are riding B-Cycle bikes out to UCSB, out to Isla Vista, down to Summerlin, Carpinteria. We see people riding to Elings, Arroyo Burro Beach. So we have actually started conversations with regional partners in the South Coast to assess the potential for a regional bike share system and to see if it could be something we should put energy into, if partners are interested. That's still gaining traction, but we are meeting with them, and it sounds like there's a lot of interest. So moving forward, the bike share system here in Santa Barbara will need to adapt. There are changes we have to make in the development of the network, the operations of the system, especially if it gets bigger, improvements that can be made to the user experience, and we will continue to monitor ridership as well to see if there are gaps in the systems that we're missing that would better serve residents or neighborhoods. We will also continue a regional bike share discussion for bike share to assess the potential for that. And then lastly, bike share will need to continue to adapt to any potential changes in the State Street Promenade or future planning changes. One example of that comes to mind is AB 2097 and the impact of less parking facilities in the downtown area. Things like bike share and bikes might become more prevalent and more effective ways to move people through our downtown core. That concludes my presentation. Again, I'd just like to point out Jessica Grant is with me, and behind me is Jesse Rosenberg, who's the general manager of B-Cycle Santa Barbara, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really, really interesting. And no matter how much we read about it, there's always more to learn in the presentation. Thank you for taking the time to create that for us. Mrs. Sparza, do we have any public commenters on this item?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this item, please fill out a speaker slip in the back of the room and turn it in. Not seeing any movement to do so, so then let's turn to virtual. If there's anyone joining on Zoom who would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand and we can call on you. Not seeing any raised hands and no written correspondence, so back to the commission. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There is some excitement on my screen. We have lots of people ready to comment, but I just want to remind the commission that this is an update, so we welcome questions and comments. There won't be any decision required on this item. So first we have Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This program actually came up during this morning's Downtown Parking Committee meeting. So in case you hadn't heard, they noted that there's been a decrease in hourly revenue, so fewer people parking their cars downtown, and they wondered if it was related to more people commuting using B-Cycle, which is a positive thing for our climate and transit and circulation. But I'm curious, can you track, or how do you track the commuters? You mentioned that, so can you see every day at 7:30 a.m. somebody leaves the Mesa and by 8 they park downtown and return?
Commissioner Boss, that's a great question. The short answer is there's no silver bullet of how to establish who's a commuter, who's not. You can look at general patterns of, weekday mornings from 7 to 9, bikes are coming into the downtown core. Weekday afternoons from 4 to 6, bikes are leaving the downtown core. You can assume from that these are commuters doing that ride. We can get more granular with some GPS data, but it's user provided. So if you're using the app and you allow B-Cycle to note where you are in the app, we can figure out where those patterns are going, which is how we gained some of the discrete user GPS that we found about riders going out to Isla Vista, et cetera. But it's not down to the scale without some back-end work of like, oh, they left this station at the Mesa at 7 a.m. and went here and then went home at this time. So generally speaking, we can make some inferences about who's commuting and how they're using it. But when it comes down to a pinpoint accuracy, we don't have that at this time.
Great, thank you.
Next, we have Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Grant probably remembers my objection when this was first proposed, both for aesthetic reasons, but mostly for the fact that public property is just being used to operate a private business. And recently, Ms. Grant, you said that there is a nominal amount that is paid for the use of city sidewalks and streets.
I'm happy to respond to your question. B-Cycle does pay an operator's permit fee for operating in the public right-of-way in the city of Santa Barbara. And that is a per bike fee that is assessed annually.
Okay, does it begin to meet the, I realize the purpose of this is to get people out of their cars and create, have less pollution and so on this car traffic. But does this in any way meet the value of the real estate? Or does it?
You want to take that one?
Yes, so yeah, I'll add to that, Commissioner Lodge, through the chair. We look at the public bike share system very similar to the bus system by MTD that we have in town. So there is real estate for bus stops, bus amenities, so people can ride transit through our city and beyond. And so this is similar where we have amenities. In this case, it's a docking station for those that want to take bike share. Just the bus passes, those are require fees. And this also does require fees as well. But it's when you look at the pricing for it, it's very nominal amount to the user. And it's, as far as for amenities, what we expect in our pedestrian and bike network is to have, besides for transit and bicycling and benches and lighting, and we also have just regular bike, what do I want to say, bikes, docks, not docks, but bike locks, thank you, or yes, that are also around town. So that's something that we anticipate always to be part of the furniture, so to speak, in the public realm.
Well, there's a big difference between a private company operating and the MTD, which is a public agency. But thank you, those are my questions.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it. I wanted to just ask some questions on this low-income program. What are the qualifications and how does one apply, and how are you getting the word out on that program? Because I hadn't heard of that, and I'm thinking that that should be better advertised in our community.
Commissioner, excellent questions. The low-income program is based on qualification for EBT or SSI here in the state of California. So if you qualify for food stamps, you will qualify for the program. We are working on streamlining the application process, but at this point, you write the B-Cycle general email inquiry, and there's a link on the B-Cycle homepage, and they will send you an application if you meet the qualifications. So if you fill out that application, can prove your qualification for EBT, you will receive a $25 promo code for the annual membership.
So are we doing anything about, since this is a program, as Commissioner Lodge said, when it did come before the Planning Commission, there were a lot of questions about the fact that it's a private company operating in public spaces here. So are you going to work on, how do we get to the point of letting our community know that this program is available? I think that's really important. So, you know, how can we do that? Or can we brainstorm that, or?
It's an excellent question, and to provide an update and some context on what we've done, the initial focus for the last 2 years has really been to develop the bike share network, because if we don't have bikes in your neighborhood, it won't be something that you see as a viable day-to-day transit option. So that's been the first push, and that has involved a lot of legwork and staff time to actually implement all these locations, get them vetted by the traffic engineer, coordinate with different city entities, and then ultimately make it happen in different neighborhoods. That being said, we're now getting to a point in the program where the network does feel more established, and we're seeing the ridership that we want to see, and we're seeing a lot of repeat users. And now is the time to really work on developing that low-income program. And to that end, a few months ago, B-Cycle actually applied for a grant, the Clean Mobility Options Grant here, and they are now in the phase 2 of the application. So the funding is not confirmed yet, but they are working with the CMO organizers to hopefully get a sizable chunk of money, 1.5 million? So if we're successful with that grant, it would be $1.5 million that is strictly dedicated to focusing on AB 1550 low-income communities here in Santa Barbara.
Okay, so some of that
So-
would, some of that 1.5 million would come to Santa Barbara for a
This would be
low-income-
exclusively
Oh,
for a low-income
exclusively.
program here in
for-
Santa Barbara.
For here in Santa Barbara?
Yes.
Oh, cool, okay.
Yeah, and part of that effort, you know, in addition to getting the physical infrastructure on the ground, which is quite expensive from a capital standpoint, but also hoping to bring in some coordination and some public outreach, which frankly, you know, our staff and B-Cycle staff have not had a lot of time to dedicate to as we've built the program out to this point.
Okay,
And just if I could answer to another kind of comment that I'm hearing coming through about the public-private nature of this program. So back in 2017, there was a South Coast Bike Share feasibility study that came out that was published with work from UCSB, the City of Santa Barbara, all the regional partners. And they estimated that a bike share system in the City of Santa Barbara would involve $2 million in capital costs. Prior to this public-private partnership evolving in the bike share sphere, cities just went out and bought bike share systems.
yeah,
And said,
that was going to be one of my questions.
"We'll
Because
spend-"
some jurisdictions pay to have you in their communities. Is that right?
So I'm a city staff employee,
Yeah.
but some jurisdictions will actually buy all the capital infrastructure for a docked system and then either create a nonprofit or manage it on staff time. But that's a $2 million capital outlay that
Okay.
the city would have to come up with. With the emergence of the public-private partnership, we've seen the ability to provide this transportation option in the city by allowing them to use our public right-of-way, but really at very limited cost to the city of Santa Barbara.
Okay, that's a good, that's good to know, because there was a lot of controversy when we were doing the coastal development permit for that. So that's really good to know, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Are we having a powwow? Do we?
No, I just wanted to add that just to become the operator was a public process that was just to be the permit operator. So other bike share companies also put in bids and review.
Okay, so there was like a RFP?
Yes, so,
or-
yes.
Yeah,
It
okay.
was all a public process for that.
Okay, great, thank you. I don't remember that ever coming up at our PC meeting back then, but, okay. And then I wanted to ask, so you talked about potentially developing, I just have two more questions, Madam Chair. You talked about potentially developing or assessing a regional bike share system. So Mr. Ferdner, I'm not sure it would be you, but you would be involved. What sort of discussions have been going forth with the county, with the city of Goleta, which would be, I think, important with UCSB and the city of Carpinteria? What, are we making progress there and the Board of Supervisors or the county itself?
Commissioner, that's an excellent question. Just for a little bit of background context, we have formed a subcommittee, an ad hoc subcommittee, to discuss the potential for regional bike share. It involves members of City of Carpinteria, Goleta, UCSB, the Isla Vista Community Services District, et cetera, SBCAG as well, and the county. I would like to point out that the county does currently have a permit process in place for shared mobility. And there are dockless bicycles and scooters on the ground in Isla Vista right now. So, you know, if B-Cycle wanted to, they could apply for that permit and go ahead and work with the county to install locations in the county. One of the biggest barriers that we've met in assessing the potential for a regional system is the areas in South County that maybe wouldn't provide the ridership that we'd like to see. As I mentioned earlier, it does involve a pretty significant capital outlay to bring bike share to some of these locations. And bringing bike share exclusively to Goleta or Isla Vista or Carpinteria doesn't necessarily work as a standalone option, especially when you're dealing with a docked system. So it's how to build out a network regionally. And one of the big barriers to that is financing. So last year, the city was partner in a grant with some other South Coast agencies that was unsuccessful, actually, but it was looking at getting REAP 2.0 funding, and I don't remember the acronym, so apologies. But it was looking at utilizing some funding to help with the capital outlay, and then those regional entities that were involved would dedicate staff time to implementing the program. But this program does take a lot of oversight and management, all the way from, you know, coming to boards and commissions at the beginning to talking to residents and business owners before a station's installed. And so I think that's been a challenge as well on the regional front, is ensuring that other jurisdictions have the people power to implement a program of this scale.
Okay. And part of the reason why it's successful here in Santa Barbara is because we're such a tourist community, right? That seems to be, that could make that a
That is part of the
one-word answer.
equation, certainly. We have a few things going for us. We have a regular tourist economy. We have great weather. Our downtown core is relatively flat, and we're fairly close together. So if you start
Yeah.
thinking about Goleta or the No-Leta area and how to establish good connectivity between those areas, transit hubs, et cetera, you're dealing with a lot longer distances than what we see here in Santa Barbara, which is fairly condensed.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. That was an excellent answer to that. And then my last question goes to the slide, and you were kind of, okay, so you were talking about tracking a bike that leaves the Mesa at 7 a.m. every day, okay? So you're Monday to Friday, let's say, so you're assuming that's a commuter and then returns something. Is there a way for a commuter that wants to use an e-bike to actually feel confident that one's going to be available and that they can reserve it ahead of time. So I'm going to leave my house at 7. I know my bike's going to be there, and I'm going to return at 5, and I know that bike is going to be there for me, and you're smiling, so.
Unfortunately, the answer to that question is no, and that is one of the
I was hoping you were smiling because it was, yeah.
Sadly, no. That's the second most common question that I get. There's a learning curve with bike share, and I tell people it's similar to riding mass transit, where 9 times out of 10, there's going to be something there for you, and 1 time out of 10, it might not show up. And there might not be a bike there for you. And one of the things that we've learned in the development of the program, way back in 2019, the vision was small groups of docks, right? So 2 docks
Right.
on every other street corner throughout town. And the intent was that would limit the municipal bike share feel, right? So if you go down to LA and you see 50 Metro bikes stacked up, we didn't want that for Santa Barbara. What we found out is that if you install a 2-dock station, one of those docks is empty all the time, and there's only 1 bike there. So if you're a group of 2, it doesn't work for you. In fact, we've played around with station sizing quite a bit, and right now our minimum station size that we try to install is around 6 docks. We recently went up to 20 docks at the Amtrak station. It's a transit hub. That station is consistently in our top 3 of most used throughout the city. We cannot keep enough bikes there. And we want it to be a reliable option where when you go downtown, you know that there will be a bike waiting for you or a dock to park your bike at the Amtrak station.
Well, I would hope at some point, if you have an annual pass and you want to encourage people to commute on these bikes and get out of their cars, that you will have some sort of system where you can be confident that there's going to be one there and that you're not stuck if you're commuting on the bike. I think that would be an important addition to a program. So, okay, I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Vice Chair Bauke, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question, which is, you spoke, first off, thank you for your report and thank you for your success. I find that very reassuring. As you have success, and as you spoke to the need to expand the network, and I was wondering about, we've had this fairly significant financial investment by the city for the Los Positas MODOC corridor, and that's, if the county ever gets its act together, could be continued and go farther. I notice there's only 1 facility on that network. Are you thinking about expanding more? Because that's a neighborhood that would use it, but there's only this one, and it's not a MODOC or nowhere near the neighborhoods in that area.
Vice Chair Bauke, that is an excellent question. Again, it brings up the question of how far and how isolated a bike share station can be and still prove successful. We do have a bike share facility at Elings Park, and we also just installed one recently along Las Positas multi-use path, right at
Across from the tennis courts, approximately?
across from the tennis courts. I'm forgetting the intersection with the cross street there.
Portishead.
Yeah, Rebecca Lane. Thank you. We're also in conversations with the county to look at Hendry's or Arroyo Borough Beach. But again, real estate is an issue. That's a really congested parking lot. There is a sidewalk improvement project that's going to be happening there in the coming year, and we might actually utilize some public right-of-way at that time to install bike share there. I anticipate that we'll also look closer to the end of city limits and the Calle de los Amigos area for another potential location, but we do want to wait until that county and city path connectivity is completed.
Okay, Thank you. That's my only question. Thank you.
And just
Wonderful.
to add that it's almost complete for the next sort of section, so just north of Calle de los Amigos, the city's constructing their path. We're probably about a month out from it opening, and then the county just recently installed the connection point to Villa Lucero. And then with hopes for the phase 2, it connects to the Oberon Trail. So as we get more infrastructure coming online, that provides more, again, more real estate to add more facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grant, and thank you, Vice Chair. Next, we have Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. Thank you for the report and the update. I wasn't here a couple of years back, obviously, when this all came about. And I really appreciate your enthusiasm. And most of the questions have been answered. I was actually wondering about the private-public relationship to this and the financial arrangement. So that was very helpful to find that out, because I couldn't imagine the city taking on this all by themselves without having some kind of outside support. $8 per 30 minutes, I see. If you just want to rent it for 30 minutes, it's $8. Is there a cap on that? That seems kind of high.
It's funny you should say that. So early on in formation stage of bike share here in Santa Barbara, we heard a lot of feedback about pricing. And just to put a point of context in, a lot of other docked bike share systems owned or operated by B-Cycle are $5 for 30 minutes throughout the country. Some have gone up recently, but that's a price point that was the established price point when they came to Santa Barbara. We heard from bike rental shops and agencies here in town that that number should be significantly higher. Most bike rental shops here in Santa Barbara offer e-bike rentals for $20 to $25 an hour. And the perception was that bike share was going to undercut their business model. So we actually increased the proposed price from $5 to $7 per 30 minutes. And have found that to be sustainable, and even at the price increase of $8, people will try bike share for 30 minutes. So that's something we monitor closely, and I've done a lot of outreach to local shops to assess any potential impacts on their business. Most shops have said they don't see conflict, and that it is a different business model. So when you rent from a bike shop, you know that you're going to have bikes available for you when you show up. They can come with helmets. They have bikes of different sizes. And so some shops obviously don't like bike share and feel that it's competition for them. So we try to take that into account in where we locate bike share bikes, the pricing structure, et cetera. But really that price point for walk-up users, we want it to be enough that they are willing to pay it for this viable transportation option here in the town, and then also get the chance to experience an e-bike ride. We found from a lot of users that trying that walk-up rate actually acts as kind of a gateway drug for them, and they later realize, hey, I want my own e-bike that's parked in my garage that's available when I want to go downtown and do errands. So balancing the needs and desires of bike shop, the community, and keeping that price point accessible is what we're trying to do with that pricing structure.
Okay, and I imagine a lot of tourists would use that too, pay by the $8 for 30 minutes. And because your other price points are pretty reasonable when you look at it, $25 for low income for an annual pass, and then the monthly and annual for regular users. Just two other things. I'm glad you're trying to fill the gaps in, and I'm glad it's popular. And I see all the racks all around town. Now, do the racks have any, I know we don't have advertising in town, but do the racks have any ID on them, in order to get the word, another way to get the word out there?
There is a QR code that you can scan on the racks for more information, but we have really worked to keep the visible components of bike share to a minimum. When B-Cycle came to town, they initially proposed this large logo on the down tube of the bicycle and some, I shall say, maybe like slightly more garish color schemes, and we worked with them and their designer to really come up with what we have today, which is a pretty simple aesthetic. If you'll notice, the logos are quite small on the frames and the docks to minimize that large branded feel here in town.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll wrap up with my questions. I wanted to make sure I heard you correctly when you were listing off the connections, and when in responding to Commissioner Wiscom's question about reaching out beyond in the region, I heard you list them. I'm not sure I caught, did you include Carboneria? Yes, so I'm curious to know, when we discuss those types of bicycle connections, where are we planning the connection to take place? Is it down the 192? Is it down, the 101 perimeter roads? Is it along the 101? What is the plan?
Chair, that's an excellent question. And yes is the answer.
All of the above?
You cannot control where people go on a bike share bike. So one thing you can do is build safe infrastructure to enable them to use it. But even that being said, some people are going to feel comfortable riding on 192 and some people are not. We see tourists riding in different places than locals. So it depends on your knowledge of the infrastructure and how to get to where you want to go. I will say that we see a lot of people taking B-cycle bikes out from downtown and riding to Butterfly Beach. And some people keep going. So,
Yeah, certainly. And perhaps it's more of a transportation question. Where is the projected bike path potentially for the future to connect to Carboneria being thought through, if anything new is taking place there?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bonderson. That's, right now, as you see, the Highway 101 is under construction, but in connection with Highway 101 is a lot of the parallel projects, and you also see the roundabouts coming in as well. But there's also a lot of parallel bike infrastructure also coming online. We actually do have a defined coast route between here and Ventura, but not all parts of the coast route are for all ages and abilities. But over time, that 30-mile coast route, the goal is to make it for all ages and abilities. So will that be done overnight? No, but we're definitely working on that. And of course, with the one piece of Las Positas and Modoc that we just recently installed, we just got $54 million in active infrastructure. And one of the big multi-million-dollar projects is Cliff Drive, which is another big section of the coast route. And so again, and then as we go closer to Carpinteria, we have some other gaps right at Cabrillo Boulevard that we're actively seeking funding for that. So hopefully coming soon.
Yeah, hopefully in our lifetime.
Yes.
I mean, you, Ms. Grant, know that I've had the pleasure of being the liaison to the Transportation and Circulation Committee for the last 4 years, and so I've had the pleasure of keeping up with the news and the grants and the updates, and so it's just been a really exciting committee to be able to follow closely with. Thank you for all your hard work on that. My next question has to do with, again, a follow-up to Commissioner Wiscom's question that got my curiosity piqued. You were speaking about how to get, the bikes back and to keep the docks full. I was wondering if there's any type of behind-the-scenes program that perhaps exists, or maybe it doesn't, that helps figure out where the majority of the bikes are and maybe have a vehicle that goes and picks them up and brings them to the emptier docks. Does that exist at this time?
Chair Bonderson, what you're referring to is balancing.
Ooh.
And that does
Good word.
exist. B-Cycle has 2 large cargo vans that they use to balance the larger number of bikes. So same thing, Fiesta would be a perfect example. People brought bikes from out of town into town. What we found is those bikes actually went back out into the neighborhoods a lot after the Fiesta Parade ended, which is unsurprising. So balancing wasn't as critical for that as we thought it might be. But we do have stations that regularly fill and then sometimes overfill. And so what B-Cycle will do is send a van out, pick those bikes up and bring them to the outlying neighborhoods where they might not necessarily make it home to. Additionally, they have an electric cargo bike that they use for service in town when possible.
That's really exciting, and unfortunately, I'm not a user, so I don't know maybe things that may seem obvious to the users who may be listening. So these types of conversations help me to understand and be able to share my knowledge then after this meeting. When you speak about over-parking, what happens in that case? Do you just pull up and sort of leave the bicycle near the dock and it still counts for being returned?
Generally, it involves coordination with the B-Cycle Support Center. And
Okay.
if you show up and you're at an isolated dock location where you can't just go another block, I think of the Las Positas location or some of those further out areas, you can notify their email response line or their phone line. They have a fully staffed phone line, and they can check the bike in manually for you. At that point, they will dispatch somebody to go pick the bikes up if there's an overfilling of a station.
This is all very exciting, and I'm sure it's a little bit out of our purview today, but I'm so curious about how it all works, because it seems to work very nicely. You don't drive around seeing bikes just dispersed loosely in the community. It's obviously under control. But thank you for sharing that. The other question, another curiosity question, you mentioned earlier that the Amtrak station is one of your top 3 stations in our community. What are the other 2? Uh-oh, trick question. Just a curiosity question. Come on up
I'll
to the
let
mic.
Jesse Rosenberg here, who is the GM. Yeah, you can sit here.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much for all your questions and all your support. I would say there is an area called Cabrillo Triangle known on my team, and so that's basically all along the waterfront. Once we got that coastal development permit, we were ecstatic because we knew ridership would be really high along Cabrillo. So that would be Cabrillo, Milpas is one of our top stations. And then I would say Victoria and State fluctuates. So you have that right kind of at the cusp of going towards Upper State, and then East Haley and State, which is right, yeah, right at the end, and down the center. So it's an interesting pattern, and with the rebalancing question, that if we solved that, that's $1 billion bike share question in the industry, seriously. So, yeah, we are trying to establish defined routes, and those change based off of our expansion, based off of riders' feedback. And again, we take everyone's consideration and feedback seriously. So please, I know we get a lot of emails, and we're happy to address all that, and we're trying our best to, fulfill those.
It sounds like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, based on this research, the information, the statistics, is it true to assume that when you see a hub that might collect more bicycles, then you may add more docks?
Yes, and it's because we have great partners with you guys, the city of Santa Barbara, Sam and Jessica. We have been able within 2 years to go from 2 to 6 docks to 6 to 20 docks. And I don't think there's a limit yet, but we really hope within the next, by the end of the year, that some of those stations on the east and west side will be a much larger station footprint for accessibility.
Thank you. And my final question may turn back to Ms. Grant. Just out of curiosity, how involved or how influential is the bike share team, the external team, to the State Street development, the advisory committee, and so on? How involved and how influential is this program to what we're potentially seeing under development now with the SSAC group?
That's a great question. I think With the B-cycle and the way that we've been able to track the B-cycle bikes, because we haven't been able to track all cyclists at this point in time. So it's been a great way to see how people ride our network. And then as you saw in the heat mapping, of course, where Santa Barbara, or I'm sorry, State Street is our spine network. And that's very clear when you see with the bike share bikes, and then of course the waterfront. And the reason I think too why State Street was designated as the spine is because that is a big piece that connects the waterfront to downtown, and where we have the highest level of ridership. We are working closely with the committee chair to have a transportation theme meeting before the State Street Advisory Committee, and I think we're targeting in October of this year, but we hope to share some of the data that we've learned from B-Cycle to be used as informative pieces as we think about the transportation network. And then recently as well, regionally, I sit on our regional board, the Technical Transportation Advisory Committee, which is my counterparts from all the county. And we, through SBCAG, we have a big data source now called Replica that we are all learning, but it's tracking all modes of transportation. And so we're learning just beyond B-cycle bikes of what that looks like, and mapping that we also hope to use as a formative process again for that effort.
Ms. Grant, I know this was not lost on you, but as you know, I'm also the liaison to the State Street Advisory Committee, not only to the Transportation Circulation Committee. So this is a very well-connected meeting for me to share some of my knowledge over the 4 years of being liaison to you twice. But the reason I bring these up is because I've always been a huge advocate of alternate transportation. If we're in a transitional moment in our state's history of reducing vehicular traffic and cars, and bringing in bicycles, bringing in hopefully better bus stops, better bus connections, improving our bus transportation as a whole throughout the county, out to the farthest corners of Goleta, as well as Carpinteria, improving the system we have now, certainly. My ongoing repetitive question, I'm sure you've heard over time, is, how are those networks being thought through? Even if we don't see them yet, you have a plan, I know. So my final question, again, just with regard to bicycles specifically, is do we have, somewhere behind the scenes, do we have a plan for a bicycle exclusive connection out to Goleta, and eventually, we've already talked about Carpinteria, but out to Goleta, where the bikes can come from a farther distance and have a pathway that you've already begun? I mean, it's clear we're right up to the edges of the city. Are we in collaboration with the county to cross that invisible boundary and connect?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bonderson, for that comment.
I set you up.
Yes. Well, it's right now the what's coming soon is just the connection for the Auburn Trail, and that again connects with we call it the Nolita area to Goleta UCSB. That's a very well used currently, but will only get more enhanced. And then from the Las Positas Modoc, we'll continue on with recent active transportation program monies to connect from Las Positas to Mission Street with a protected bike facility. So once you go in there, and then you'll hook into other bike infrastructure that's currently on construction. So we'll have a really good route that way, but we also still have our eyes as as Upper State Street redevelops. And so we're already thinking about what that network is, and big gaps on Hollister. So that's the other eyes, and then how does that connection work into Upper State Street to then get to downtown and waterfront as well. So that's kind of the bigger picture. As we go back into the downtown that you mentioned, I did give a 45-minute presentation on the history of State Street at the TTAC, or not TTAC, Transportation Advisory Committee about a couple of weeks ago, and that's a preview of what would be before the State Street Advisory Committee. But Planning Commission is our heavy with land use, but you can't talk about land use and transportation in isolation. They're very much connected, and so as Mr. Fertner mentioned, with AB 2097, with private developments not needing to provide parking in the downtown area and waterfront areas, we think the demand will continue even more as we move into the future for walking, biking, and transit facilities. So yes, our eyes are on that, and really with the density, and as you know, you've seen before you that the housing element updates it. We have to plan for about 5,400 units coming in over the next 10 years. With the bulk of the density being in the downtown. So again, all of these are really crucial points, and thank you for asking that question. And as it relates back to B-Cycle, again, with our smaller unit sizes, not all new developments will have bike parking, but not all existing developments have bike parking. And so B-Cycle is another way to not have to worry about maintaining your own bike, but having a transportation source there.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. And I just want to maybe end my my opportunities to speak with a comment. I feel that when any member of our community thinks about the overall infrastructure, what it takes to develop a community and keep it going with the current conditions of the times, there's always gaps. There's gaps in our knowledge. Even the most up-to-date members of our community, including myself, there's gaps. And in some ways, depending on what we may be liaisoning or how involved we are with the different activities, we might have more knowledge and less gaps, but there's always going to be gaps. And I think having your presentations and having continuous outreach and awareness workshops will only help our greater community. And I mean that across the invisible boundaries that connect our city to our county. We have such a unique layout in our greater community here, because we have a city that sits inside of a county, but it's all intertwined. And the reason I brought my question up is because there are people who aren't here, that they don't follow along with the city because they happen to live in the county or the Nolita area, and they want to know how those connections are being planned. And I think we all have faith that it's happening behind the scenes. I always assure them that I'm fully aware that's happening, I just don't know what's happening. So, this moment, if anyone's listening out there and giving you the opportunity to share, I hope it allows people to rest assured that those connections are being thought through and planned. There's a lot coming ahead of us with those Hollister connections, the downtown, the upper state activities that are being worked on actively these days. And I want to thank all of you from your Bike Share program team for the continuous amount of effort and growth and progress you've brought to our community. It's very understated, but it's such a big part of the growth of our alternate transportation options. And lastly, I just want to say, because I'm aware of both of the State Street and the Transportation Circulation Committee, I know we lack some data that makes it difficult for the public and for the decision-making team, those of us who volunteer to be on those committees, to really understand how to make the best decisions possible. But having these statistics that happen to exist because of the Bike Share program, it's only going to help. And I look forward to that future meeting that's being planned out and the distribution of that data for everyone to be able to make the best decisions possible as we move forward in every aspect, in every committee, in every department, and everyone's working together. Thank you. Before I close this item, I just want to open it one last time up to my commission if anyone wants to add anything. Certainly, Commissioner DeLuccio.
Yeah, I have a, Ms. Grant, you gave a talk on State Street. Is that recorded anywhere?
Yes, it is recorded, and I will be happy to share it with the planning staff to provide the link.
I'd be very interested in that. And I have one final question, going back to the monthly pass or the annual passes. So when you have those annual passes, you're entitled to, you take your e-bike out, but how do you, is there a time when you need to return it? You can just keep it.
Forever.
That's the third most popular question I get. Yes, so all the different memberships have different times of checkout that you can have. So I'll give you an example from the annual membership standpoint. You pay $150 and you get an annual pass to B-Cycle, which is either app-based or you can have the RFID card as well. You can go and check out a bike share bike and you get 60-minute unlimited rides. So you could ride that bike for 59 minutes all the way across town. You could plug it into a dock, end your trip, and 2 minutes later, walk down and grab a different bike and check it out for 59 minutes all day long. We actually increased the ride time for the annual membership because we found that there were a lot of trips that were right in the 34 to 35 minute range, mostly from Upper State Street to downtown or from downtown up to the Mesa. And so annual members were having just a little bit of a hard time trying to rush to get in that 30-minute window. And to incentivize annual members and the regular users, we increased that time period to 60 minutes. So that includes annual members, and low-income members also have annual memberships. They also get a 60-minute ride. And then other monthly members get a 30-minute ride, unlimited 30-minute rides. When you pass that 30-minute or 60-minute mark, you start incurring half-hourly usage fees. For an annual member, it's $3 for every 30 minutes, every 60 minutes after. And then with a monthly member, it's $3 for every 30 minutes after. So you can hypothetically check a bike out for much longer than 1 hour if you want to, but you will be paying for it.
Thank you. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to just provide the answer to Commissioner DeLuccio's question regarding the video in case the public may be interested. On the city website, if you look up the boards and commissions, you'll see that the TCC, the Transportation Circulation Committee, has their own page, just like we do. And videos are archived there, so you don't have to wait for a link to be sent. You could actually go and just find it yourself. And if I'm not mistaken, it was on July 27th when you made that presentation.
Yes, that's all correct.
Yeah, very good. So anybody listening and to anyone who's interested, you don't have to wait. Please access it, watch it. It was a wonderful presentation. I never cease to learn something new. So thank you all for being here today. We're so glad to have your update and the positive information that came with it. We look forward to seeing you again with more in the future. Thank you. This item is now closed, and we are going to move straight on into our next item. That is item 4, recommendation to council. And this item is a project proposed at 400 West Carrillo Street. Before we begin, I have to ask, do any commissioners have any ex parte communication that needs to be disclosed at this time? No. So I know that city staff will need a moment to set up. Do you need more than 5 minutes to set up? Are you ready to go? Okay. Then in that case, I'll give you a moment to get settled, and then we are going to welcome Megan Arciniega from the city. She's here to give the staff presentation. And after that, we will hear from the applicant. We will call them up to the podium as soon as Ms. Arciniega's presentation is complete. So if you're ready, I will go ahead and welcome you. Ms. Arciniega, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson and Planning Commissioners. My name is Megan Arciniega. I'm the project planner on the project before you today at 400 West Carrillo Street. It's a rental unit project. As you may know, the property at 400 West Carrillo Street is a city-owned property. We operate it as a commuter parking lot. The city currently owns the property. It's about an acre in size, and if you're familiar with it, is heavily vegetated with existing canopy trees that provide shading for the parking. This site was of interest to the city for a number of reasons. Typically surface level parking lots provide an opportunity for redevelopment. They're usually underdeveloped and kind of operate as an opportunity for more and better uses. So in 2019, the City Council actually looked at this property along with the Housing Authority and directed city staff to work with the Housing Authority in pursuit of a workforce housing project on this particular lot. And that's for two reasons. One, as I stated, surface parking lots are typically seen as opportunity lots that we can provide more housing units, but also that in particular that workforce housing is needed in our community. And that's a different group than you may be familiar with. Workforce housing meaning not just service industry, but also up to teachers, firefighters, and any kind of semi-professional uses. So with that direction, the Housing Authority worked to design a project with this direction and with city, in conjunction with the city and a private developer, to come up with a 63-unit residential building. The proposal is for a rental-only building, so not condominiums, and it would be 100% income restricted, meaning that you would have to meet certain income criteria to rent and qualify for a unit. Although they were aiming for a middle and moderate program for the residents, they've also included low as part of that income mix. So it's a mixed affordability level of both middle, moderate, and low. And what that means, if you're not familiar with our income levels, is that the state has established where we need to provide housing, that there's an array, a variety that needs to serve each community, and they allocate housing needs based on those income levels. So the lower ends of the spectrum from 0 to 80 are extremely low income, very low income, and low income. This is what we commonly see or refer to as capital A affordable housing. Really, generally what that refers to is that there are federal subsidies and funding mechanisms to help support workforce housing for service industries and lower income categories such as that, so that we can have housing that's affordable to those income levels. The higher end of the spectrum are the moderate income and above moderate income levels. In addition to that, the city has our own definitions for workforce housing, which includes, we have our own definition of middle income and upper middle income. And those are the service industries that I was kind of talking about, the firefighters, teachers, attorneys I know in town that fit into that category that aren't able to either purchase or rent a market rate unit. As you know, in this town can be extremely unaffordable. Even though they're a local professional working in town, they don't have enough funds to rent or buy, but they are in those upper tier income categories. So in our current housing element, this level of income housing is actually strongly encouraged. We call it workforce housing. There's been policies in place for years now to encourage it, but it's a difficult income category to get at, and we'll kind of go into some reasons why. So the Housing Authority went away to work on this middle income and moderate income project on the Carrillo commuter lot. It's an ideal site because it is near the downtown area. It's just outside the central business district, but just 3 blocks down is our transit center, so bus options to every direction in town. We have bus stops all along Carrillo and up Castillo Street. We have biking paths, class 1 and 2 nearby. It's highway adjacent, so it's a convenient access, but there are challenges with the site as well. So particularly the site is right along Mission Creek. You can see it in this photo, it's a channelized concrete section of that creek, but Mission Creek is steelhead habitat, so it's been cared for by the city. There are programs to try to make sure we're bringing back the potential for steelhead. This area being channelized doesn't really have much habitat value to it, but it is an important resource. Also along Mission Creek, we have floodway provisions that we want to make sure that we're accounting for. It's adjacent to the highway, which is a good thing for access, but then a negative thing when you're looking at air quality and noise abatement. There are also resources on site, not just the trees for vegetative screening, but the nesting bird habitat that they might have, or the abatement from noise or air quality. And then also there's some contamination on sites, ground soil contamination, just from historic uses of the property. So it wasn't without challenge that the project design had to account for each of these elements of the site. In addition, when the project was being developed, it was at a time when our multi-unit housing standards, which we call the Average Unit Density Incentive Program, or AUD program for short, was being shifted into a new area of consideration of looking at floor area ratio as a way to regulate the size of a building. So instead of density, where you're changing, or you're looking at the number of units a building can hold, which sometimes is ineffective because you can make bigger units and less of them, or more units and smaller. It doesn't really change how you're seeing the building on the exterior. So floor area ratio was an attempt to look at blocking and sizing of massing of buildings and siting that appropriately in the downtown area or in the city. So in the 2019 era, when this project was being developed, and right after council directed the Housing Authority and staff to work together on the project, this site was set at a 2.5 floor area ratio regulation, so kind of a sizable project that would be looked at. Here's an example of some of the blocking and massing of what floor area ratio studies we're looking at. What could you kind of get in terms of site coverage? How large could the building be? What kind of overall shape could it take on a public street for like a medium-sized building? So this is a FAR of 2.0 on a fairly large lot, just for example. So the project applicants went away and did that work. There was a project agreement that was set up between the city and the applicant team. This helps the guiding document for how we should proceed as a partnership. This is worked on between the applicant's attorneys and the city's attorneys. They also went through design review process. So once you come up with the design that was partly informed by our Mission Creek setback and the approach to both the main streets, that design was then vetted at a pre-application stage in front of the Historic Landmarks Commission. And they did provide feedback on the massing and different variations of form. And then the project continues to, what we have in the city is a pre-application review process. And the intent of this process is to provide some large red flag issues to an applicant, making sure that they're planning for and designing accordingly for any issues that might come up. And this is a required process for any projects in the AUD program or multi-unit program that are using the highest density tier of priority housing density allowances, and on larger lots, so lots over 15,000 square feet. This project at the time fit this category, so they went through this step. During this step is when the standards for multi-unit housing changed, and the city council decided to go away from the FAR standards. So staff, in conjunction with the applicant team and planning staff, went through the project and decided the best way to proceed to carry out city council's direction, and that was appropriate, was a development agreement. Development agreements are a tool that the state has allowed or put into state legislature in, I believe 79, I'm going to get that wrong, but that's a tool to allow an agreement, an exchange of benefits. So it allows the city to give on some kind of development standard in exchange for a better good of the city. So here we are getting 100% income restricted housing, and the give is the higher density units that would have been more in line with the FAR standards that were planned for. So we've drafted alongside with the applicant the development agreement, which again is kind of the the rule book of how we're going to proceed as a team and share those trade-offs. After that stage is when then the applicant could proceed with their formal planning application. And this is what is now part of your review. So the formal planning application then takes all that pre-work, refines the plans. We go through application components that we need for legal reasons, everything that needs part of the planning application itself, double checking for zoning elements and zoning review, and then going back to design review for a formal design review by the Historic Landmarks Commission. And then before your planning commission, we also have to finish environmental review. This project was very unique in that because we're dealing with unique densities, it wasn't a straightforward process for environmental review either. Instead, though, it met a very interesting criteria of a new CEQA exemption that was put forward by this in this Code of Federal Regulations for transit priority projects. Is to encourage transit priority projects, essentially housing projects in downtown or urban areas that are close to transit, walkable, and other services as we are here. So we're down the street from the transit center, down the street from Ralph's and Center and other services, and allowing those types of projects to proceed through CEQA with an exemption as long as certain criteria are met. And there's very list of specific criteria that need to be met in addition to technical review that needs to happen in terms of air quality, tree removal, noise, and hazardous materials and cultural resources that are on site. In addition, it asked that a legislative body make an action to determine that the project qualifies as a transit priority project. So our legislative body is the City Council. So the City Council needs not only to make that recommendation, but to have the material that goes along with it that supports why staff and your commission, hopefully as well, agree that this project well qualifies for this exemption. So as part of your packet and part of your review today, staff is asking that you review that component and provide a recommendation to City Council so they can make that finding. And then finishing with the other scope of the request. So this project started out as just a standard multi-unit housing project, but since we are now in a different density level than is typically afforded, we're doing the development agreement. And just to break down the density ask, so if this project was all low income, it would be a straightforward project that would just go to design review and would be approved there. No planning commission needed. That would be if it was 100% income restricted, but at the low level. Because the applicant is proposing moderate and middle as part of the mix per direction of City Council and our housing element to try to get at this upper workforce housing income level, we now have different requirements for density. So the ask is that we adjust the tiers since it's 100% income restricted, but to moderate, middle, and low income levels. So it's allowing the mix to happen with that density allowance. And then lastly, there's a height request exception. So the zoning height limit is 45 feet in this location. It's just outside the central business district. That would have allowed 48. They're asking for 46.6 to allow some variation in building form. There's a process in place to allow that height exception. The project would qualify, but it requires additional process. So we've wrapped in that request into the development agreement to bring it forward all together. The same with open yard. So although the project provides sufficient open yard, the Historic Landmarks Commission agreed with the layout of the design of the courtyards and the landscaping. However, it doesn't meet the letter of the zoning requirement. There's a process in place to allow modifications to open yard standards. Again, since we're already doing a development agreement, we've wrapped that into the request. Next is parking. So the project being in the downtown area and part of this transit priority project area, 3 blocks down from the transit center, doesn't actually require any parking on site. So it's within the AB 2097 area. No parking for this type of use is required. Because the project was largely already designed but also because it has to have buffering from the highway for noise, for air quality, and creek setbacks. It really lent itself to retain the surface parking that is there and that we're seeing. And then also, it was at the request of the neighborhood and also the applicant themselves that they liked the idea of the design of having surface level parking, and that what that does and provides for the project. So in addition to keeping the parking, although not required, they are also asking that it be unbundled. And this allows for some flexibility. So unbundled means that you rent the parking space separate from the rental unit itself. So if I don't have a car, I don't have to pay that additional cost to my rent. I can have a essentially less cost monthly basis. But if I have 2 cars and there's 2 spots available, I can rent 2 spots, and then I can carry that cost. If there were a community member, if there's lots of extra parking, it would allow the owner to then rent those spaces to nearby, neighbors nearby that also need that spot. It just separates out the rental of the parking space from the unit. So that's a request that's incorporated as well into the development agreement. And then lastly, as the creek limitation area encroachments, I kind of touched on Mission Creek being a special creek in our jurisdiction. We have special requirements in our ordinance that make sure that we have provisions for flooding along Mission Creek specifically. And it provides a limitation area from the top of bank back 25 feet to allow that no structures are placed in that area so that it doesn't impede or create a flooding hazard. The applicant's proposing to essentially maintain the existing development footprint and keeping the parking line, which currently encroaches into that area, and fencing, which also encloses, the existing fencing encroaches, and just maintain that. So essentially keeping the existing kind of configuration. However, that's considered development, so it does need a specific exemption to allow for that type of use or development in that area. So that request is also being incorporated into the development agreement. So in conclusion, your commission is asked to review the project today and make a recommendation to City Council on the development agreement itself, the density and income mix, the height, the open yard, unbundled parking, creek development limitation area encroachment, as well as the conditions of approval. So the conditions that your commission would typically see are now wrapped into the development agreement itself. You'll see those as part of your package, and then also comment on the environmental review. The details and merits of the project itself, I'll leave to the architect who's here to present next, but if you have any questions of staff, we're happy to answer them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ms. Arciniega, for not just this presentation, but also your explanations during our site visit. I felt like our site visit and your extensive participation was very helpful for us to understand the site while we were walking together. Next, we will welcome the applicant up to the podium, and I just want to ask you to state your full name and your relationship to the project, especially if there's going to be more than one presenter. Just introduce yourself before you start. And also, just as a reminder, you'll have 15 minutes to present, and if for any reason there's time left at the end, you're welcome to use it at your discretion if you choose to respond to any of the comments or questions up here today. So you can keep that and reserve it for your use, okay? Mrs. Sparza, if you're ready, we'll have you set the timer, and we welcome your presentation. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Bonderson and Planning Commissioners. I'm Dale Azam. I'm the Real Estate Director at the Housing Authority of the City of Santa Barbara. I'm just making some introductory comments, and we're going to turn it over to our architect, Christine Perrone from the Canal Collective, and we have some assorted other support system here. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I think that Ms. Arciniega did a great job of covering a lot of the issues, but I just want to start. I think everyone's familiar with the Housing Authority's mission. It encompasses not just low income, but includes moderate and middle income as well. We have been in business for more than 50 years. We currently have developed or acquired 1,500 units within the city, and then we also administer about 3,000 housing choice vouchers throughout the South Coast. I'm sure you're very familiar with this chart. This chart basically shows you that the project we're proposing here is exactly, directly providing the type of housing that is most in need in our community. This is lifted straight from the draft housing element, and it basically shows you that in the most recent regional housing needs allocation cycle, we only provided 1.5% of the moderate income housing needed. So I don't think I need to say more on that. Again, I think Ms. Arciniega did a great job. A couple of things I just want to highlight about the project history. The Housing Authority approached the city about the idea of developing housing on city-owned parking lots many years ago. And as the collaboration unfolded, this site sort of came to the surface. And as was described, pretty early on, city decision makers zeroed in on the need for housing for the missing middle. And so we have been working with that. I think you got a good description about the FAR versus design unit AUD density. I think, you know, one of the things that you might be wondering is why didn't we go bigger? And we did present a much higher density option in the July 2020 community meeting. And the feedback from the neighborhood was pretty consistent. They thought it was too big. They thought the Vulcan scale was a bit too much, and they felt it was underparked. So we took that feedback, and we basically have been more focused on a medium density, what we would consider a medium density project, which is what we're presenting today. It was mentioned that we've been through historic landmarks and have favorable comments. I wanted to just say one other thing about the low income. In order to take advantage of the CEQA exemption that was mentioned, we have elected to go with 7 low-income units. In addition, though, philosophically, we like the idea of the income mixing and within a development. And so we think for 7 units, the trade-off is worth it, and we think it's a good idea. A little bit more detail on the environmental situation. This site was used as a dairy from 1920 to 1980, and there was a fuel depot there that had leaked some petroleum. So we have done fairly extensive testing now, working with our consultants and with the County Environmental Health Services. We now have an approved corrective action plan, and we will live by the terms of that. The last thing I want to do before I turn it over to Christine is just touch on our proposed financing for this development. There is no established financing vehicle for missing middle housing. And so we had to turn over a lot of stones to try to solve this riddle, and we think we have. We've located a private altruistic investor that we're working with, and they're willing to accept a reduced yield for a community benefit project that they believe in. Now, that reduced minimum yield is 5%. When we looked at a 100% moderate income property, we weren't quite hitting that yield. And so the idea was born to sort of sprinkle in some middle incomes that can pay higher rents. And so that's the formula. You know, we hope it's going to work. We think it's going to work. We're optimistic. But in the event we reach at the end of the day and those ratios are out of whack, the Housing Authority is going to be out of pocket several $100,000 of pre-development expenses. And so we have the ability to switch, if we have to a low-income project. We know how to finance low income through the low-income housing tax credits. Not Plan A. It's a backup, and we hope we don't have to use it, but we feel like we have to have it. I know we're going to have questions later, but I'll turn it over to Christine at this point.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Chair Bonderson and Commissioners. I'm going to kind of go through these quickly and skip some slides, but please, if you see anything that I'm skipping, please feel free to ask me questions. I think you're familiar with the site, and so I'm going to just click through these quickly. And I just want to briefly go over the site constraints that we looked at that developed the site planning that you see today. Obviously, the highway adjacent, the Mission Creek adjacent, and also we were very aware of our 1- and 2-story neighbors to the north of us and wanted to make sure that we fit into their neighborhood as well. And of course, there is the existing tree canopy that we took into consideration. And so all of those fed into a site planning design that we knew we wanted to buffer our buildings to our neighbors to the north. So you see that. With that, we kept the existing entrance, north entrance into the parking lot. We have Mission Creek and the freeway, and we knew we needed to honor the setback and also honor moving the development as far away from the highway as possible. And so you see the second buffer zone. We knew we wanted to keep the residential scale along Castillo Street, and so you'll see that in this design. And finally, we also knew we wanted to, we looked at the corner of Castillo and Creo and knew that that wasn't really a great place to live on the ground level, so it was the ideal location for our lobby and any kind of non-habitable use. And that gets our development area. And so this is the proposed site plan that you see before you today, resulting from that, the footprint. And then we did continue to use the surface parking lot that you see here that creates those buffers. In addition to creating those buffers, it obviously is an affordable manner for us to provide the parking. We did originally look at podium structures, and it was just not within the realm of this project. And the other benefit of this approach is we get to preserve about 20 on-site trees. We'll have 24 on-site trees removed. Just some information on distance to top of bank, about 55 to 75 feet. Our distance to the on-ramp is about 150 to 172 feet. We are requesting that just over 4,500 square foot open yard. Most of that's located in an internal courtyard, which we believed strongly was important as a buffer, as a safe, quiet space for residents to live here, and we were very pleased that the Historic Landmarks Commission agreed with that. We do have a landscape plan here if we have questions, and luckily our landscape architect, Courtney Miller, is here as well. First floor plan, second floor plan, third floor plan. And then you'll see here on the fourth floor plan, we have internalized that taller element, so we are creating the smaller scale architecture around the perimeter of the site. Here's a view from Carrillo at the intersection, looking at the project. Here we are on Castillo Street. That is that existing entry that you saw at the site visit that we're reutilizing. Just a close-up view at Castillo. This is the more northern entrance that we still celebrate with a nice archway and a smaller rooftop element. And then the view from Mission Creek Bridge, and here you can see in addition to all the other benefits that the existing tree canopy is providing, it will also be a visual barrier for that fourth story element. Our elevations. And here is the west elevation. This is the one facing the highway. And this is where we are requesting that 1'6" height increase there in the middle. It's an architectural projection that we want to do. And as you can see, it's actually sloping away. It's not even a solid wall. It's an angled piece in that. So I wanted to talk briefly about the proximity to freeway mitigation. We've located the building as far away from the highway as feasible. Our building orientation and outdoor living spaces have been located away from the highway with that internal courtyard. By keeping the Tipuanas, again, we've managed to, that's going to help us remove air pollutants. And then we will be installing a central interior air filtration system. We did have an acoustical report prepared for the project, and we will be also be following the direction from that report. which will include higher SDC ratings for our doors and windows. And then we've already included the mitigation measures for our outdoor spaces, for the balconies. You'll see that in the plans now. And then certainly for the construction noise, we will be installing solid barriers at the east and north sides. Finally, our development agreement requested standards, and Ms. Arciniega has covered those quite well, thank you. So I can skip that. And thank you very much. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. All right.
Yes, you have some time remaining for you in case you need it later. Now we'll turn to Mrs. Sparza. Do we have any public speakers, either in the room or remotely, that would like to speak on this project?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. We do have one speaker slip, and that is for Dacre Beebe. If you'd like to come up to the podium, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. While she comes up, if there's anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak, please fill out a speaker slip and turn it into staff.
Hi there, how are y'all today? My name is Dacre Beebe. I just moved here to Santa Barbara just a few days ago. I was living in Huntsville, Texas previously. I actually was serving on city council there, so I'm familiar with what you guys are doing here. And I really appreciate the work and effort that you put into everything. But I did want to know, are you guys going to be able to answer any questions, or will the staff be able to give me some answers after I speak? Maybe through email or on paper?
We're not supposed to answer any questions directly to the public, but if you present a question, someone here may be able to answer it for you.
Okay.
Amongst their own questions, yes?
Okay. All right, so my understanding is that this is currently a parking lot. I'm not sure if it's a paid parking lot or not. Another thing is, I've actually was on the Housing Authority Board in Huntsville, and so I kind of understand what you're doing here. I know that one of the problems with using the Housing Authority developer is that you lose all the property tax income, because the Housing Authority creates an exemption. So all of these homes, if they were just regular homes and they weren't through a Housing Authority developer, would bring a whole lot more property taxes to Santa Barbara to be able to use to fund other things. So going through the Housing Authority to build this development is really going to lose a lot of money for the city and the government. Another thing is that, are we really trying to help low-income communities with this? I mean, you're only offering 7 units. What is the income of those people in those 7 units? So we have another, 56 units that are going to be middle-income units? So why are we touting this as a low-income property? It doesn't seem like it's correct. Also, I'm kind of concerned because I've seen the area of the neighborhood near Haley. You've all driven through there, I'm sure, having to go by 101. I know I try to avoid it myself. It's kind of an ugly neighborhood, not taken care of. I assume the majority of it is rentals. So when you create an entire rental unit like this, you're going to have a lot of people living and not caring for the facility. And I think that's a pretty popular area of town near downtown. I really don't want to see something that's not cared for and that has trash and people and ugly things hanging all around it. I'd rather see it beautified. And for me, also, I've noticed that in Santa Barbara, we have a huge parking issue. Everywhere you go, there's nowhere to park. So you're telling us there's going to be all 63 units of people, and 56 of them are going to probably own cars because they're going to be at least middle income. Because from what I've seen online, the lowest home you can get here is $1,500 a month, okay? And the average income in Santa Barbara is $80,000 a year. So the majority of people here own vehicles. So where are all these vehicles going to go when we already have a parking issue? You say it's a parking lot. To me, that's the best use of it in this community. And why is it that people aren't using it as a parking lot if it really is a parking lot? People should have a lot easier access to downtown than they do now, because right now they're having to park 3 and 4 blocks away to even go anywhere, or else they have to pay for public parking, which is kind of a nuisance for a lot of people. All right, let's see. Another solution we could possibly do, I'm just giving you ideas, is instead of creating a low-income rental community, why don't we try to lower the rent? Because you're talking about grants.
I'm so sorry, your 3 minutes are up, but I want to welcome you to our community.
Okay,
And I want
terrific.
to
Just one quick idea. Government grants can be used to lower the income for everybody in Santa Barbara already, so we can look into that versus creating new rentals. Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and I wanted to take a moment to welcome you to our community, and also with the background that you have from where you lived previously, we hope to have you catch up on how Santa Barbara works. It's somewhat of a unique community, and you're welcome to submit some of those questions for answers to our city staff. So you can get those types of information through the city's website. Thank you for being here with us today. Do we have any other speakers, Mrs. Sparza?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I do not have any more speaker slips, so I'll go ahead and turn to virtual public comment. If there is anyone participating on Zoom who would like to speak, please raise your hands and we can call on you. Not seeing any raised hands, and then we did receive written correspondence from Jay Higgins, Lillian Cutler, Ben Romo, Pat Saley, John Campanella, and Amanda Cobb on behalf of the Habitat for Humanity of Southern Santa Barbara County. Back to the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Sparza, and thank you to all the public commenters who sent in their written correspondence. Next, we will be turning to the commission for our question period, and I just want to remind everyone to turn on your lights and wait your turn. I will call on you. And I don't have anyone yet, but there we go. Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe, for volunteering. It's your turn. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't see any lights, so I figured, what the heck? Okay.
Why not?
Okay. I think this is for Mr. Henschke. My first question's on the development agreement. And it's on, in our packet, it's on page 19 of 210, or page 3 of the development agreement. Section 6 describes, Mr. Henschke, are you here?
I am.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Thank you. Section 6 describes the low-income units. And I'm just wondering, why are the moderate and middle-income units not also described? Because they're included in the definitions section on page 10 of this agreement, but they're not described here.
The best I can tell you is because we didn't think they needed to be described in that particular location of the agreement.
Okay. I mean, the majority of the units are proposed to be moderate and middle income, so, okay. Whatever. And then,
If I could just expound a little bit further, the affordability mix and the affordability covenants are actually dealt with later in both the agreement and in the project agreement. And so any concerns that you might have about what the income restrictions would be, how they would be addressed in terms of long-term covenants, that's already been taken care of in the project agreement and will be implemented through the deed covenants that happen once the property is conveyed from the city ownership to housing authority ownership.
okay, thank you. Okay, and then my next question, I think it's probably for Ms. Lazam, I don't know. It's about the owner entity, and I'm just, you talked about having a private investor. So that's the owner entity that we're referring to here that's willing to accept a 5% rate of return. Okay, and then the way I understand this works is once you get through the permitting process and all that, and you develop your schedule of values and your costs for the project, you're going to start to look at the mix of units and if you're going to be able to cover some moderate and middle income units with that 5% rate of return and not have to go back to all low. Is that right?
Exactly,
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
And just on
yeah.
the owner entity, it's sort of following a model that we use in the low-income arena where it'll be a limited partnership, a housing authority affiliate will be the general partner, and the limited partner will be the investor, and the limited partner would provide all of the funds.
Okay,
And
so-
then the rest of what you described is exactly right. It'll all be figured out at the very end.
Okay, so the limited partner's the owner entity, is that right?
Well,
Or-
it's the limited partner, the owner entity is a limited partnership of which the investor is the limited partner.
Right, okay. Getting a little too legal for me, but okay, I get it. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, thank you for that
Sure.
answer. And then my next question, it might go back to Mr. Henschke. I'm very familiar with contracts for construction. I'm not so familiar with these kinds, but there was, I think, Exhibit B2, this is on page 63 of 210, talks about substantial completion. And I want to, there's language in here that I don't want to say concerns me, but that I want to understand better, and that's that it says that owner entity receives a temporary or final certificate of occupancy or its equivalent issued by the appropriate local governmental entity for any part of the project. Why is any part of the project in there? It seems to me if you're going to get a certificate of occupancy or temporary C of O, that you're, it's going to be for the project. I've never seen part of the project. So I just wondered why that language is there.
Honorable Chair, members of the Commission, Commissioner Wiscombe, first of all, I want to point out that the agreement that you're referring to has already been executed and is an enforceable contract. But getting to the question about why it was substantial completion, the substantial completion actually definition really talks about when the construction is done, even though that the occupancy of the project might be done in a phased manner. So it might be completed, substantially completed, the construction work is done, but we might not have had closeout of all of the units for occupancy because of punch list items. It's a standard definition for a project that might be occupied in phases.
Oh, okay, that makes perfect sense to me now. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so, and Mr. Henschke, what you're saying is that any of these exhibits that are here, like this Exhibit B2, and Exhibit C2 and C1-1, et cetera, they're all part of the executed document so far, right? So we don't need to actually spend time on that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, okay. But I can spend a little bit of time on the conditions of approval, I gather. Okay. So I'll just move on. I'll move on to page 83. This is the conditions of approval. This is drainage and water quality, and I think this is just, I just want to understand this. We're using Tier 4 for the stormwater for this site, and from what I read in the staff report, we're using Tier 2 for the right-of-way improvements. Is that correct, Ms. Arciniega?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lodge, yes, that's correct.
Okay. So I just would like to know why this only refers to Tier 4. Can we add Tier 2 for the right-of-way to just clarify?
Yes, Commissioner Wiscombe, that's something we can definitely add. I was going to just check to see if it might have been captured in the public improvements section, but I think you're right that it is not.
I couldn't find it, so, yeah, but I think this is where it belongs, probably. Okay, that's great, so we could add that, good. Okay, and then, this project is, it does not qualify for the parking permits program, is that correct? That's what I thought. I couldn't find that again in your staff report, but I was sure I read that somewhere.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lodge, it's in the conditions of approval.
Okay, I'm Commissioner Wiscombe.
I mean,
not
Wiscombe,
Lodge.
sorry. Apologies.
Okay. And then, okay, because I think, let's see, I'm looking at the applicant letter on page 115 of 210. This is Ms. Peron's letter. I think I think she says something about the street parking concerns by including Castillo Street in the residential parking permits program. So I just wanted to clarify that this is not in the residential parking permits program, right? Yeah, because you just, it's just a clarification that it's,
Commissioner Wiscombe. Yes, so typically projects that, new projects that come forward and either propose parking or don't or have reduced parking are required to, this is a standard condition that we put on that you're no longer qualifying for street parking permits essentially to be part of the street parking program because your development is either choosing to or choosing to not provide parking. So it's the considerations are there. For existing residents in the city, they can apply for other developments. They could apply for a street parking program.
okay. Okay, thank you for that. And then I was really confused by this, and it appears a number of places, but, or a couple places, but the applicant letter on page 3, which is page 116, number 4, which is listing the, I guess, the conditions that council put on the project, says number 4 refers to the city council hearing where the city retains the ownership. So can someone explain to me, because my understanding is that the ownership is being transferred to the housing authority, but this was one of the conditions that the city wanted to put on this.
Yes, it's, I can understand the confusion. The idea here is that the city is going to transfer to the housing authority. The housing authority will transfer it to the owner entity. And exactly when those were going to happen was kind of left a little bit loose. But one of the reasons for that was because of the environmental review. And so making sure that the environmental conditions were understood. And there was some thought that we would do it maybe on the same day, but we're still figuring that out. So I think that's, it's going to be transferred from the city to the housing authority. And then when we're ready to go, it will get transferred to the owner entity. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Okay, so the city retains ownership up to a point where there's a trigger and then.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that was totally not clear from what the council had, or from what was written by what the council had, what their desire was. So, okay, great, thank you. And then, I just have 2 more questions. Have all the regular parking, permit holders for parking at this commuter lot, are they being taken care of to move to other commuter lots? I knew Ms. Grant was gonna. And then how about the New Beginnings people? So I just kind of like, they're gonna get displaced. Are we taking care of them?
Yes, Commissioner Wiscombe, through the chair, Jessica Grant, Supervising Transportation Planner. The short answer is yes, they will be taken care of. There's currently 14 permit holders, and they would be transferred to parking lot 2 is the plan, and they would have 2 years as a commuter parking permit holder for that same price for the first 2 years. And then beyond that, they would go to the standard parking rates for whatever lot
So
that they
this
choose.
parking lot has a lower rate?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we haven't, at this point in time, I know that it gets looked at over time. Could it change in the future? Potentially of different rate structures, but at this time, yeah, we have a rate for commuter lots and then different rates for the other parking facilities.
Okay, and then what about the RVs that are parked there?
Yes, so for the New Beginnings, that would, again, look for a different location. There's currently 10 permit holders for the evenings and 2 daytime permit holders. The rest of the RVs that might be there are not permitted. But so we're responsible for the 12.
So
relocation.
is the New Beginnings program looking for an alternative solution for the ones that are legally permitted there?
Yes, that's, and so there's other, they run the safe parking program, if I said that correctly. And so there are different locations, and so they'd be working, when the time comes,
Okay,
working
so-
on a
so-
different
so
location.
They
This-
won't be displaced?
Correct, this is not
then,
the sole
yeah.
location for them.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for that answer. Okay. And then my last question, I'm on 182 of 210, and I'm kind of going back to Mr. Busk's favorite category, the conditions of approval. And I'm under the environmental review here. It lists four things, approximately 225 cubic yards of lead impacted soil, a vapor mitigation system, soils management plan, and land use covenant. I was wondering if at least 2, 3, and 4, the vapor mitigation system, and I think Ms. Perrone referred to that, and there was also, yes, and referred to a corrective action plan, which was the environmental remediation. I'm just wondering if we can't kind of wrap a bow around that and make sure that that's in the conditions of approval if it's not there now. I didn't find it, but it's pretty specific to the vapor barrier, the vapor mitigation system, soil management plan, what was mentioned as the corrective action plan, and then I don't know about the land use covenant, will be recorded on the deed, but at any rate, I didn't find that in the conditions of approval, but I felt that those things might be important to include.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Wiscombe, they are included in the conditions of approval.
Where
both-
are they, please?
So we have, and we did them, while I'm finding them, so first it's on page 78 of 210.
Page what, I'm sorry?
78 of 210.
Yeah.
The general conditions, the approved development. So we included it in the scope of work because it's part of what the applicant is proposing to do. In addition to also the noise attenuation measures, and then also the remediation measures, and then also the arborist report recommendations. So you'll see under
I
B-
see, okay, corrective action plan, soil management plan, okay, great. I totally missed that because I never would have gone to the general conditions to find it. I would have gone to
Right.
the environmental section, so.
We wanted it to be explicit in pointing to those specific reports because they're quite detailed and there was a lot of specific
Great, okay,
recommendations.
thank you for that, and I apologize for missing that. I didn't, okay, that takes care of my questions. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. And next, we have Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question was around the impacts on existing uses, and we just got the answers about the commuter lot and a bit about the safe parking program. And I understand with the RVs parked there, it's harder to find alternative lots. So I want to make sure that I understood correctly that the city is working with New Beginnings to identify, okay, thank you. And there's another existing use, the Neighborhood Navigation Center. So that's a weekly time for homeless service providers to meet with clients. What accommodations are being made for that group?
Thank you, Commissioner Boss, for that question. I don't, I know that that's in discussions, and I think the hard part is from going through entitlement process, through building permits, it all takes a while for this site until it is, closed, officially closed. So there's a little bit of time, but that's under discussion. Everybody is aware of the proposed development.
Great, thank you.
And unfortunately, we do have lots of locations throughout the city to provide those additional services.
Wonderful, thank you. a question that I think is for the applicant. I wanted to get some more clarification on the number of units within each income category. So we heard that the 7 are about the 10% for low income, but I was unclear on the number for moderate and middle. And I want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. So the low is the 50 to 80% AMI, and that's up to about $80,000 for a household of 2, and the moderate is 80 to 120% AMI, so that's up to about $140,000 for a household of 2. So that would certainly serve our teachers, firefighters, and other folks who are in that kind of missing middle category.
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. Looking at the history of this, we started out as a moderate income project, and we realized that the moderate income alone was not going to hit the minimum yield. So the idea is if we bring in some middle income that can afford higher rents, we can get to where we need to be. The last time we ran those numbers, we were at about 50-50 between moderate and middle. Now, we've since added, or I should say, we've turned 7 of those into low income, but those low income are going to have project-based vouchers, and so the rent is going to be it's not going to be too far off what the middle income rent's going to be at the end of the day because of the federal subsidy. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, thank you. Another question just about the length of time that this project and these efforts have taken. So I understand council gave the direction in 2019, and you outlined quite a bit about site challenges, changing regulations, multiple processing steps, pre-application design review, pre-application review team, planning app submittal. So that is a lot. And so I understand that all of those steps, especially changing regulations and the environmental review, have taken that may be the reason that it's taken this amount of time. So how can the Planning Commission and the City Council encourage similar projects at a faster pace?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Boss, thank you for that question. That is one of the challenges that staff wanted to bring light to for your commission as you're considering other process improvements, the housing element, and other programs. There's a few things. So we've been looking at over the years changes to the multi-unit housing standards and the processes therein. So right now, the process steps is that there is the pre-application review that happens first, again, to kind of hit at big issues and then have a formal application. The intent is also that pre-review is at a lower cost than a full investment into a fully developed project. But it ends up adding additional time, and there's, some pros and cons to it. So one thought is perhaps doing away with the pre-application, allowing people to directly submit to this extent they can, and especially if they're ready to go, then they would have presumably more of those materials, and we could just work through those items during the completeness review. The other processing step that's been looked at in recent years is the elimination of the Planning Commission concept review step. So along with that pre-application step is Planning Commission taking a preliminary view of the project as well as the Design Review Board. So eliminating that step and the pre-application steps would also allow them to just get straight in the door, go to HLC and get their comments for better or for worse and respond to them in the formal application stage rather than in a preliminary stage. So that's one way to just kind of jump further, into the project quicker. We're seeing more interest in applications these days to go ahead and do that. And we do have specific services that if you voluntarily wanted to just get feedback before submitting, we could still do that as a voluntary basis, just not requiring it of every application. So those are some changes that we're looking at and will be coming to your commission for consideration. The other thing that I know has been talked about with the housing element and our affordable housing, city bonus density programs is looking at ways to incentivize income restricted units in combination of, having more units, giving more density, but then perhaps getting more income units than just the inclusionary 10% requirement that we're seeing. There's a large range between the 10% required inclusionary and 100% what we're seeing here today. So is there something in the middle that we could incentivize perhaps in our own city's bonus density program? And just to clarify that, we have a city program that's is kind of in kind with the state's program. So the state bonus density, the idea is that you're incentivizing more units and some trade-offs for more affordability. Our city program at one time was more aggressive and offered more benefits than the state. Now the state has kind of exceeded us in that way in many ways. So our program's not as attractive or alluring. It doesn't really offer incentives that the state doesn't at this point in time. So perhaps relooking at that and what would it, locally, what would we favor and what would the exchange be that we would want to incentivize? So those are some of staff's suggestions and things that have come up in recent conversations.
Thank you. I appreciate that and want to acknowledge that you've mentioned it today, but also part of the housing element update. So looking forward to some of those changes. Another question about impacts on nearby transit. So when we were doing the site visit, we saw some bus stops nearby. And so I'm curious about the impacts during construction, which was in our packet. And there was also a note in the conditions of approval, a note about bike share, exploring feasibility of incorporating bike share along the Castillo Street frontage. So can you speak to construction impacts on transportation and potential impacts or opportunities once it's developed?
Thank you, Commissioner Ross. For temporary impacts on during construction phase, we do treat it as temporary. We look for the city works with the contractors and the applicant to make sure that there's a limit of construction employees parking in the neighborhood that would otherwise be for residents. So I'm trying to limit that and to find alternative means or carpooling to the site. So that's just kind of sort of the standard business for all development projects for that. And then in the long term for this project, this project is wonderfully located. It's less than a 2-minute walk just to about 5 different bus routes. And then they're about a 7-minute walk to the transit hub. So that's really exciting for residents so that they not necessarily be dependent upon a vehicle. And of course, we're next to a lot of bike infrastructure as well.
Perfect, thank you. I had another question. I think this may be for the applicant. How will the parking space rental to non-residents be administered?
Because it's going to be unbundled, it'll be able to be by demand, first of all, the tenants that need a space will get it. If there's not a great demand for the spaces, and we do have spaces available, I know that the community would be very happy if we made some of those available, because that came out in some of the community meetings. Obviously, the tenants that live there need to have priority, but we can manage through that and see exactly what kind of demand there is and handle it that way.
Great,
So,
thank you. I did want to make sure that the tenants were prioritized over
Yes.
general community.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. That concludes my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Vice Chair Bauke, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Got a couple questions of staff and then a couple for the applicant. Let's start with staff. Question which the public raised was about the property taxes. This property is currently owned by the city, correct? And at the end of the day, even if it goes to the housing authority or its other entity, the property taxes will still be the same as far as there's not going to be a loss of property taxes to the city. Is that correct?
If I could comment on that, Commissioner Bucky, the owner entity is a private entity, and it's not fully affordable, so this property will pay property taxes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's not the situation of, if it was a public entity, then it would be, we would go from 0 to 0, correct?
Right.
Okay, and now we're not. Okay, so thank you for that clarification. Civis Arganea, sorry, yeah. I'll butcher your name. Please butcher mine. Why wasn't this property put into the priority housing overlay? It seemed like it's just sort of ripe for that, and it just didn't make sense to me. And why wouldn't, if it wasn't, which it wasn't, why aren't we just doing a priority housing overlay as part of the actions we're taking at this time?
Chair Commissioner Bauke, good question. And we looked at that. So it was an intentional move. Properties immediately adjacent to the highway were omitted from the highest density tiers intentionally because the city has in ordinance air quality requirements for setbacks from the highway. So 250 feet from the highway, sensitive uses such as residential need to have certain accommodations made, such as what the applicant's doing of not just setbacks, but vegetation screening, air quality, air conditioning and all that kind of thing. So, and it's written, and Commissioner Lodge pointed this out at the site visit, such that we do that at such time that the State Resources Board has determined that our air quality emissions are effectively lowered. We don't know the current standards, if they have been effectively lowered by the use of EV vehicles and changes in gasoline regulations. But that is the goal, that over time, that layer, that regulation adjacent to the freeway wouldn't have to exist. But as it is written in our general plan and our ordinance currently, we still have that precautionary measure and require distance and reduced densities along the highway. So at the time it was written, the lower that wasn't the highest density. They were intentionally omitted. It does go, the priority housing overlay just goes just to the edge of this parcel. So it is right up to this parcel. And as I showed in the graphic for the FARs, they were considering a higher FAR for this parcel. So it's of discussion, but that was the intention of move back when the density overlays were set for the program.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Could you put up the second slide of the applicant's presentation? They had the regional housing need allocation numbers. I just wanted to ask a question which goes to background on this, because I watched both the City Council's May 7th, 2009 and December 10th, 2019 presentations and discussions, and
Sorry, my
that's okay.
I'm not getting I'm sorry, I'm not getting a change to the screen with my. Yeah. Is that you guys or me? It's on my screen, yeah. Let me,
Oh, we saw, we had a flash.
Did you get enough time to look at it?
No, I think that would be a little challenging.
I'm glad I wasn't the one.
Thank you.
that case.
Okay. The question I have is, and I'm just trying to understand the council's action, and it's, I presume they're looking at this 1.5% completion rate as jumping off the chart as the rationale for the moderate categories, what we're trying to accomplish with this project versus low and other ones which are done with tax credits and other vehicles. Is that a correct understanding? Because I know the community's going to ask this question, is so why are we doing this versus the lower categories when you have a site like this?
Unfortunately, the way RENA calculates these categories is like this. I think if they showed middle versus above middle, you might not have it look so good because it just says above moderate. But the way this evolved was it was going to be moderate, and then we realized that wasn't going to work. And so it was very transparent. We went back and talked about it and said, we think a solution may be to sprinkle in the next rung up, and that can make it work. And that's you know, that was accepted.
Okay. Well, since you're up there, I've got a follow-up question to that, which is you discussed that there's a potential of a Plan B. And my question is, what is the break point on that, and how does that work? Would you decide to go to the 100% low project?
So, you know, we won't really know if this all works until the day we're ready to put the shovel in the ground and we have the permit, because that's the day we're going to have a firm construction budget and we're going to know what the rents are. We hope that this investor will still be there. We hope the numbers will make sense for them and we'll go ahead. If it doesn't, there have been a number of other similar funding sources, not similar in the sense that altruistic investors that would be willing to take a lower yield, that we would explore further. So it's not like we're just going to go straight to the low income option. But at the end of the day, as I mentioned, we will be out of pocket quite a bit in pre-development costs. So we want to make sure we are not wasting that public money and that we have a project at the end of the day.
Okay. Two more questions to you. How often do you see projects in which you have a zero land-based cost?
We've done a couple of them. We had Grace Church donate their property to us. It seems like there's at least one other one. So we've seen a couple of them, but yeah, they're few and far between.
Rare,
Yeah.
right, okay. One of the things that's in the staff report, which you would fully be aware of in a statement that your operation has been significantly affected by the loss of redevelopment tax increment financing. What other finance mechanisms do you know out there that the city might want to pursue to recoup what RDAs used to do? I mean, there are some out there. I was just wondering if you've had any dialogue with the city about like an enhanced infrastructure finance district being adopted for the city of Santa Barbara as a way to recoup those funds.
Yeah, it's a hot topic right now for a potential ballot initiative to raise money for, that would be dedicated for affordable housing. So we are exploring that further, and we are talking with the city about that also. You know, our argument has been when you have the RDA money or whatever money the city can provide, we can leverage that money 10 to 1 through the tax credit program and whatnot. So it's really that seed capital that lets us go out and buy the properties. That's the linchpin. And if we can get that, we know how to get the rest of it done, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That's my questions.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
Thank you, and I'm glad you left this chart up. This is a great chart, by the way. So I have a question, maybe the applicant of the Housing Corp, you want to come back up? Or staff can answer the question. I think the key here that, 'cause I know we're wrestling with where are these going to fall into this pyramid over here? And these are not even the numbers right now. We're going to be resetting these numbers, right? In the if the new housing element ever gets adopted. Is that?
I believe the RENA numbers are already set for the new cycle.
Yeah, I know they're set,
And
yeah.
and I think they're doubled.
They're double this,
They're
8,001.
doubled. The actual target for a 4,100 becomes about 8,100.
8,100,
Yeah.
8,001. It's a weird number. So these are going to reset, and I guess what you're asking is for flexibility on this. I mean, it's in stone that you are going to be looking at least seven very low.
Yes.
For this
Well,
project.
low.
Low on this project, and then there's another 56 remaining. And what I'm gathering, just from reading, help me here, right now, you're looking that they could be a combination of mid and upper mid, or which would fall into the above mod over here. Is that correct?
Correct.
So then I'm hearing, when it all is settled in the dust, is this the worst-case scenario? Could they become mod or more very low, or?
They wouldn't, they could become, I mean, it's going to depend on what the numbers, we're going to use as many moderate income households as we can, and then we're using the middles as filler. So that will get set in stone when, when we know the cost.
But right now, they're all above mod, except for the low 7 low ones, right? Because you're.
No, the last time we looked at it, and we're getting a cost update as we speak from a general contractor. Last time we looked at it, in order to hit the 5% yield, we were getting 50-50 between moderate and middle. So.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
good. Then that's helpful. And I guess the key here, that these are, at the end of the day, they're going to be income restricted. That's what this
Yes.
is all about, correct? Is that for 90 years now?
90 years, yeah.
Okay, so that's good. And as far as going kind of last, the other folks, they asked us great questions. The unbundling of the parking, I mean, right now, you don't have to supply parking here, correct? But you are going to supply, is it 63
Yes.
spaces?
1 for 1.
One
yeah.
for one. So you said you don't have much experience, I guess, with unbundling the spaces, right? You haven't done that before?
I don't believe we have, but. Okay, Casa de las Fuentes is a workforce project, and we have unbundled it there.
Okay,
If-
so you
if
have
people
some-
want a space, they have to pay extra for it, yeah.
And so you do have procedures in place that you can carry over to this project,
Yes.
is what you're saying. I think I have some comments at this point. I don't have many more questions. I think we all asked good questions up here, and I actually think everything was very well, and I shouldn't say this, I have to deliberate later. It's been very well put together thank you.
Thank you. And next, we have Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the architect, something that I didn't catch in going through the staff report that you mentioned, and you said that I think I saw something about ventilation on all, is that's going to be on all the time to keep
There'll be
purify the air?
Yes, Commissioner Lodge, thank you for the question. There'll be a centralized infiltration system that is built into each unit's AC, basically. So it is always on at a low, I believe it's always on at a low frequency, and if they turn it on, it continues just to stay on. So it maintains a clean air inside the apartment.
Okay, well, I'm glad to see that the problem of the extra polluted air close to the freeway is being addressed. Thank you. That's my only question.
Thank you, and I'm going to keep you up here, Ms. Perone. It's actually just a follow-up to Commissioner Lodge's question. I'm familiar with this ordinance and where that boundary lies when you're near the freeway. I'm just interested to know if all of the units have this air conditioning set up, or is it just the ones that may fall within that setback boundary, and then perhaps the other ones don't need it because they're not in that setback? How have you designed the project?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. All of the units will
They
have
do.
the system.
And is it because they all fall into the setback, or just you're making it all uniform?
It is a criteria, I believe, for any project adjacent to the highway.
So the entire property, whether or not it's in the setback, will be applied? Okay, great, thank you. Good to know. My next question also is for you, and it has to do with if you could pull up the thank you slide. I mean, that one was a beautiful rendering, and I have to tell you, first and foremost, I'm extremely attracted to the architecture that you've proposed here with the details and the little pop-outs and the different types of windows and balconies. It's very, very, very aesthetically pleasing to the eye. I do have a concern, but I'm sure you're going to address this with an answer. On site, we were talking about just safety for the first floor residents, and in this rendering on the Carrillo side, I was curious to know, other than the planting, is there any other mechanism in place, like a fence or some sort of wrought iron work or something, so that if somebody wanted to jump into that planter and jump into those units, how have we thought through safety for those ground floor units?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bonderson. Great question. Yeah, in addition to the planter, and I think we discussed it at the site visit, these are about 3.5 feet higher than the adjacent grade. They also, and it's not really showing up in this slide,
Right.
there's a 4.5 foot high guard wall. That is actually part of the mitigation for the sound quality. So I think that would be quite a hurdle for somebody to get in there.
Thank you. And just so you know, I did my best to zoom in and zoom in and zoom in on the materials that were provided electronically to see if I could see any of those labels. And, you know, it may be in there, but it was really hard for me to see. And that's
Understood.
why I wanted to ask you, because I was confident you'd thought this through. My next question is with regard to the parking lot. So I don't know, does that bounce over to Mr. Azam or either one of you?
We'll see.
I was interested in understanding if there is any required ADA handicap parking spots, and if so, how many associated with this project? And also, the second part is, are they, would they be assigned as guest spots or be ready to be assigned as a residence unit if necessary?
Yeah, great. Thank you for the question, Chair Bonderson. I don't think this works. There are 2 required accessible stalls, and they are always required to be the closest to the entranceway into a project. And so you can kind of see the diagonal piece going across the parking lot. That's the path, the accessible path for the 2 parking spaces into the project. And there's also a ramp, again, because of the grade change. How those work on any project like this is they can be assigned to anybody who requests, and anybody can be moved to those parking lot spaces. So they're always moving around, and I think that's probably a housing authority question on how they handle that, but the building code requires that those always be allowed to be requested upon.
Wonderful. And my next question regarding the parking lot has to do with if any thought has been put into monitoring of the parking lot so that someone from the street who's not associated with this lot, with this property, wouldn't be tempted to drive in and park in a spot. I also was interested to know how many, if any, of these spots would be assigned for guests that would be related to, you know, visiting the tenants here. So would there be any temptation to drive in and take a guest spot if you're not really truly a visitor of this property?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I think I can at least answer half that question.
Okay.
We have allowed space at that entry for a mechanized gate. You'll see a gap there behind the wall. It's not been identified, but that security gate is probably a likely solution that will be happening. We were not required to do any guest parking spaces, but for how that is maintained, and it's probably a better question to the Housing Authority.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We own the property, the Casa de las Fuentes, which is diagonally across the street. And our experience with that property is that we used to have it was all open. Then we would have issues of petty crime in the garage. We had to harden the garage. Then we had the, pedestrian openings open. Then when they were accessing the garage from that. So little by little, we've had to harden, which we really don't like. We like to have a more open feel. But I think the same thing would apply here. So we designed the security features into it just from day one, given the amount of traffic that goes through there. I mean, on the parking, we were in connection with a different property. We were just talking with our internal housing management group, and reasonable accommodation for some of our tenants and where they park is one of our biggest headaches. And so the maximum flexibility that we can have is really good. So that's why I think the unbundled parking would really help us.
Thank you. I have to be honest and tell you, I'm very familiar with the property diagonal, and I know it's one of your projects, the Housing Authority projects. I was actually also aware that it had to increase security over time, which is exactly why I was addressing this here.
Yeah.
Happy to hear that you've taken from that experience and are, hitting this early on. If I understood Ms. Peron's response, and I may not have, did I understand that there is a gate that may have some sort of automated feature?
Yes.
Somebody
Yeah,
who
we'll
has
have a card or a fob or something, yeah.
Excellent. So that leads to my final question regarding the parking lot, and that is, I understood from our site visit, this is also going to be an area where people can come in off the street to drop tenants off. This could be a loading area, a drop-off area. If somebody doesn't naturally have a car, they might be taking an Uber or having somebody drop them off, would they also be assigned a fob or something that'll allow them into the parking lot if they don't have a parking spot assigned to them, but they are tenants, so that we can get them off the road? They don't get dropped off in the street?
Potentially. I mean, if you're visiting, you'll go to the intercom and call whoever you're going to, and they can make sure that you get in.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I was just thinking about that double feature of making that a drop-off zone. And lastly, we spoke about it a little bit on the site, but if you maybe have I don't know if you have something you can point with, can you demonstrate for us just on record how somebody would drive in, drop off, turn around, and get back out without using a stall? I would assume there's always an empty stall somewhere you could back in and back out, but if not, what would be the path of traffic?
Thank you for the question. I think that one, we would be probably expecting some stalls to be empty for a back-out location. And otherwise, I think there's probably enough room at some of those corners for maneuvering. So you could see when you come in and then turn down into the second one, there's probably enough room there for a three-point turn.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate having that answer on record. We talked about it quite a bit at the site. And that concludes my question period. So if we don't have any other questions, I'll just allow you all to raise your hand if there's any other questions. Please, go ahead. It's okay, Commissioner DeLuccio, take your time.
Bill McDonald. I forgot one of my questions. It may be for the city attorney. So the development agreement has something in it that the city can buy the property back after, is it 10 years? What's that all about?
I wrote this one down
Honorable
because I
Chair,
anticipated this question.
You were anticipating this one.
It can get confusing, so.
Well, Dale, you're going to answer? Okay,
I'll take a first stab if that works.
sure.
So,
Go for it.
so keep in mind, there's a 90-year affordability covenant. So whoever owns the property is going to have to, live with that. Once the property's built, the investor has the right to call a sale of the property. If they do that, the city has a right of first refusal. They also have a they have a right to purchase the property at the 10th anniversary. If one of those triggering events happens and the city purchases the property, the purchase price is going to be, basically, it's not going to be a windfall for the investor. It's going to be whatever capital they have in the building, plus any deficiency to their required minimum yields, which hopefully there won't be any, plus inflated by an inflation rate. That's it. And so the city can purchase the property for that price. The city also can assign that option to the housing authority. If the city doesn't, exercise its option, then the owner entity is allowed to sell the property on the open market. Again, whoever buys it, it's subject to the affordability covenant. And to the extent that the purchase price is above what the city would have paid otherwise, the city will get 20% of whatever that excess is. And that's how it was set.
I don't know if the city attorney wanted to add anything to that, but that was,
Oh, no, I don't, I do not. That was an excellent
yeah.
explanation.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Henschke has it easy today. Wonderful. So since we've been sitting here for 2.5 hours, I wanted to just suggest that we take a very, very brief, 5 minutes only break to extend our legs and to just have a moment to ourselves. I'd like to ask everyone to be back in their seats by 3:45. Thank you. Wonderful. We are right on time. Thank you, everyone, for getting back. And it is 3:45. We are now going to begin our deliberation period. And I just wanted to ask Ms. Arciniega, do you happen to have a slide to help keep us focused on what you need from us today?
Madam Chair, I do.
Wonderful. While Ms. Arciniega is pulling that up, I just want to remind everyone to hold your motion until we're done with deliberations. And we already have a request to speak, several, so I'm going to go forth. Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things that I was concerned about is, and one of the things we need to consider is the problem of the project being within the 250-foot buffer between the freeway and residential use. But I was really pleased to hear about how that's been addressed, it was very good. This is clearly the kind of housing we need. It's great that the city's been able, the council's already entered into an agreement to have this happen, and I'm fully supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start out with thank yous first to council for their recognition of this need and the direction for this project. For a thank you to the Housing Authority for your willingness to try something new and different. Thanks to the investor for their engagement, and to staff for their diligence and accommodations through changing regulations, consideration of policy changes, and I know that this project required multiple departments and divisions and time and effort over several years. So thank you to everybody for making this project move forward. A couple of additional comments. In Santa Barbara, it's not a secret that we have a severe imbalance in jobs and housing, and this project meets a major community need. It's housing that's affordable to our missing middle. That's our teachers, our public safety personnel, and this location makes it possible for them to easily walk or bike or take a bus to work. The project has been responsive to neighborhood and review board requests, especially around bulk and scale parking, care for canopy trees, and Mission Creek. And most importantly, to me at least, is that this is moving from words or intent to action with this project. The city's 2015 housing element sets the production of affordable housing units as the highest priority and states that the city will encourage all opportunities to construct new housing units that are affordable to extremely low, very low, low, moderate, middle income owners and renters. And the policy in that housing element directs the city to explore options to promote affordable and workforce housing by revising variable density ordinance provisions to increase affordable housing, requiring a term of affordability, and reducing parking standards with tenant restrictions. And while we're still working through revisions to different programs, the development agreement helps continue with this goal while those efforts do continue. So that's these words that we have in this document are actually happening. So thank you for making it happen. And I'm fully supportive of this project and would be happy to offer a motion when it's appropriate. Thank you.
Very good. Next, we have Vice Chair Bauke, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just start off saying ditto to what she said, because she did a very good job. I probably have a little bit different perspective, that I actually think we're sort of have a good opportunity here to probably do more than, unfortunately, the neighborhood didn't quite respond to your prior project back in July of 2020. And I would have preferred, honestly, the more intense project than the one you're doing, but I understand why you're here with this project. So I will be supporting the project. I just wish we could have got more out of in this situation. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
Thank you. I'm so pleased that this project came before us. I'm just totally supportive of it, and I want to commend staff again for the thorough work that you put into this, and also for the Housing Corporation and the council, for encouraging you to pursue this opportunity. This will help us with what we're calling the missing middle to supply housing. And the key here is going to be income restricted. I know I'm trying to visualize in my mind, where do these fall into the pockets? Is it going to be, we know we're going to have the low 7 low units, but where do the other ones fall into the pocket? But I think the main thing is they're going to be income restricted, and as the years go on, they're going to definitely become affordable, you know. So I'm fully supportive of this, and also for SEQR, I wanted to commend you for doing the technical review on the SEQR. That we know it's going to be exempt under 211551, but you took the time to go through every single checklist, I'll call it, of SEQR and identify not only it's going to be exempt, but each one you explained it out, and I really appreciate that. So I'm fully supportive of this project, recommending it to council. It definitely qualifies for the exemption, and I think I'm sure my fellow commissioner over here is going to make some recommendations as far as the development agreement goes, little modifications perhaps for the conditions of approval rather, not the development agreement, but. I think we're right on with that as well, so thank you.
Wonderful. And next, we have Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to, well, first of all, thank you all. Staff, you've done a marvelous job. City Council, Housing Authority, Christine, you've really all done a marvelous job on bringing this forward. I have to say that in July 2020, the 103 units and the community feedback that you got that it was too large, and the community feedback that you've gotten about parking, I think it's really gone a long way towards making this project successful. We haven't had any negative comments on this project from any community member, and that's really pretty rare because you've really worked with the community to bring the size down. It's unfortunate, but I think it really fits. It really fits that corner nicely, and I appreciate the parking because I think that's going to make a big difference, and the flexibility with it. I'm very appreciative of the preservation of trees and the landscaping. I wanted to say that to Courtney Jane Miller because she's been here. The landscaping is quite beautiful. So. And I just find this a really interesting, innovative project with this owner entity and the rate of return or the yield that they're going to get from the project. And I think something can be said for someone that's willing to accept that rate of return for community benefit, because, you know, you can put your money in things that can give you a much higher yield than this. So whoever your owner entity turns out to be, I think that's commendable that they recognize the value of the community and having a totally deed-restricted project that provides us with much needed moderate and even middle-income housing. And the only other comment that I'd like to make, other than obviously I go with my fellow commissioners and agree that I totally support the project. And I do want to say for staff, the transit priority project exemption was brilliant. And that was, you know, came out of somewhere that really worked out for you. So I think that's pretty awesome, and thank you for your explanation for that, because I certainly didn't understand it when you called it that. So, so my only other comment would be what my fellow commissioner here would say, and that's that I'd like to add to the conditions of approval, whoever makes the motion, the Tier 2 stormwater for the right-of-way. I think that's important. Tier 4 for the project, Tier 2 for the right-of-way work. And those are my comments, and thank you all very much.
Thank you. And I also will be sharing my colleagues' enthusiasm to approve this project when the motion is placed. But I wanted to simply say that not just a big thank you, but truly to commend the applicant team. I wanted to comment on the architect's presentation. I feel like that should be the standard for every architect's presentation that comes before us, showing the layers and just, here's the constraints and here's how we got here, and just turning on those layers and popping in your trees and, really demonstrating a very clear site relationship. I wish this could become like a standard how to present to the Planning Commission type of thing. It would probably make everyone understand the project more quickly and efficiently. I also want to thank staff, because the staff report and the extent to which staff has gone on this project to demonstrate how they got to where they got, especially with the CEQA exemptions and the checklist and the explanation also during the site visit when we were on the site, walking around and really applying it, I believe made us all have a much more clear understanding. So as a team, both from city staff and from the applicant side, I thought that this entire presentation, both in writing and in today's hearing, demonstrates the outstanding teamwork and cooperation of both together. Again, I just wish we had more projects that demonstrated this level of collaboration. And that being said, this project beautifully addresses the site constraints. I mean, clearly you have a lot of challenges on this site. The landscape that has been proposed it just makes me smile when I see those renderings. It's beautiful. I'm looking forward to the additional buffering and the palm trees that are being added, while still maintaining as many of those beautifully full-grown trees as we can. I mean, it's such a unique site, and the fact that you've chosen to preserve as much as you can adds to the beauty that it's going to be automatic when the structure's complete. We don't have to wait for it to grow. I also want to say that I sincerely appreciate the unbundled parking solution that you've proposed. Sometimes I stand alone in my support for parking and the need to have it, even though the state says we no longer need it, and many take advantage of that on some projects. But I believe that having this type of setup not only allows flexibility, but encourages inclusiveness, because we do have people who need a car for whatever reason that's private to them. And the fact that parking is an option here opens the ability for tenants to actually consider living here. Thank you for that. Thank you, and I hope that we can have that whenever possible on projects that allow for that. So I am now open to taking a motion. I believe Commissioner Boss was interested in offering one, and the floor is yours, Commissioner Boss.
Thank you. It's my first time making a motion, so hopefully I do this right. I'll move to make the findings of the CEQA exemption, section 21155.1, implementation of the sustainable community strategy as detailed in the staff report, and that the development agreement is consistent with the general plan and zoning ordinance as described in section 7 of the Planning Commission staff report, is in substantial conformance with public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practices, because it will provide additional housing units that are deed restricted as affordable housing, with the majority restricted to moderate income or middle income households, which is an unmet need in the community. And it provides assurance to the developer of the right to develop a project in accordance with the terms of the agreement, and adequate consideration is provided to the city. And I'll welcome the note from Commissioner Wiscombe to add Tier 2 to stormwater for right-of-way work in the conditions of approval under drainage and water quality.
Thank you. And I see Commissioner DeLuccio's light on. Would you like to second the motion?
Yes, I'd like to second it. Well stated, and I will second that motion with pleasure.
Excellent. So let me go ahead and open up this motion for discussion. Are there any comments from the commission? I see none. That is exciting. So Mrs. Esparza, would you please give us a roll call vote?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Boss.
Yes.
Commissioner DeLuccio.
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bauke.
Yes.
And Chair Bonderson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to the applicant team for being here today, and have a wonderful day. This now closes this item. We move on to our administrative agenda. And since we postponed last week, we may have a bit to present here today, so I'd like to open the floor up to my fellow commissioners. Commissioner Lodge, I was waiting for you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Single Family Design Board met on July 31st and reviewed a very small project, unlike these that we've recently had at the Planning Commission at 1517 Shoreline Drive. It's a substantial redevelopment of a single-family home. Since it is in the coastal zone, it will be coming to the Planning Commission for our review for approval of a coastal development permit and an open yard modification as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
Yeah, I'm going to do some HLC reporting today. I'm going to do a report on two items. The first one is on the July 12th meeting, it was 812 Garden Street. It was a proposal to convert 12,000 square feet from office to 30-room hotel. It did receive the project design approval, final approval, and project compatibility findings. Yesterday, there was a feisty meeting with HLC when they went over Dealer Guerra Plaza. It was a conceptual project review. The commission gave further design input. There was some controversy over the pavilion, and it actually turned out to be 9 commissioners are on that commission, and 5 were in support of the pavilion and 4 were not. So, but overall, they actually came together and they voted in unity to support how the project is going so far. And it's going to return to them for a formal conceptual review and HLC approval, and there's no land use decisions involved in that. And I know that Commissioner Lodge did you want to add something? I don't know, through the chair?
Thank you.
Oh, no, I forgot that you were there. And that you would be making the report. No, I don't have anything to add. It's just, except that it's a big relief to have it get this far, and so now they can go on toward finalizing the plans.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A report from the July 26th Staff Hearing Officer meeting, one that was really just of interest. It's a site that wasn't included in our housing element update in the suitable sites inventory, but it is a 1,278,486 square foot site that is currently vacant. And I thought that would be of interest with our housing element update. It went to the Staff Hearing Officer for a main residence with attached 3-car garage to be approved. So that was just of interest. It's on East Cayo-Lorales.
Interesting. All right. I'm just going to ask if there's anyone else who may have any presentations. If not, I'll go and take my turn. I have a bit to catch up on. First, I'll start with the Transportation and Communications, Transportation and Circulation Committee. On July 27th, they discussed the State Street Plaza Transportation History and Future of the State Street Master Plan. That is the presentation that Ms. Grant was referring to. It's definitely worth watching, and I encourage you to take time if you are interested in the history. On May 24th, the Create State consultant team, MIG, which is the consultant to the State Street Advisory Committee, presented preliminary concepts for State Street to the State Street Advisory Committee. And these concepts raised several transportation and circulation-related questions during that meeting that staff could not fully address due to the time constraints of the meeting agenda and possibly, the need to prepare. As a result, transportation staff are working with the Create State Street Master Planner to provide an informational briefing on the transportation-related issues, the trade-offs that the State Street Advisory Committee may consider when reviewing the concepts. As staff develop that informational briefing, as they're preparing for it now, as they develop this informational briefing, staff are first returning to the Transportation and Circulation Committee to review those transportation-related issues. And there are a number of attachments and documents that you could access if you're interested in this that are on the website. So from a liaison perspective, I just wanted to say that it was very informative, and I encourage you all to watch. The presentation itself, and this is perhaps what Commissioner DeLuccio, I didn't know you became a doctor in the last moments of my life here. Since you asked Ms. Grant, I just wanted to inform you that the presentation begins at minute 7, and it goes to approximately the 1-hour mark, if that helps you find it. And then the committee comments on the State Street Master Plan and Transportation downtown began around the 1-hour mark, 1 hour and 29-minute mark. I wanted to just say that in case sometimes the videos are so long they deter someone from watching. And next I have a few, I'm going to keep it really quick, but I have a few items. We haven't talked about ABR for a while, so they unfortunately catch up. First, we had review after final approval for 920 Summit Road. This was a proposal that we all should be familiar with. It was the proposals it was the proposal for improvements to the Montecito Club property that came to the Planning Commission. And the project did receive their final approval as it was submitted. So that project is complete and through ABR now. On the 24th of July, we had a one-time pre-app consultation review. Those are not very common, but always exciting when we see them. It was for 335 South Milpas Street, and it is a proposal to demolish 4 existing one-story commercial buildings and construct a new 99 residential unit, 4-story mixed-use building using state density bonus law. So I think that's something that we should be paying attention to. I don't know if it comes to Planning Commission. It already did, excuse me. But I mean, does it come back again? It will come back to Planning Commission. So, keep your eyes peeled and stay in tune with that one. The next one is another continued item. They came for project design approval at 540 West Pueblo Street. And this was another project that we are familiar with. It was the Ridley Tree Cancer Center. And so they came to Planning Commission. This project did receive the project design approval, continued indefinitely to consent once it is completed and returns. And then I have one more from August 7th. It's also another one-time pre-app consultation review. As I said before, those aren't very common, but we're starting to see more of them. And it's from 428 Anacapa Street. It is a project that involves demolition of 2 single-family residents and a detached garage, and a proposal for a new mixed-use structure comprising of 6 short-term rental units on the ground floor and 9 long-term rental units on the 2nd through 4th floor. And since we are constantly talking about hotels and long and short-term uses, I thought that would be of interest to our commission. Last but not least, I just want to end with an announcement. If anyone is following along or interested, the next State Street Advisory Committee meeting is coming up on Monday, August 21st, from 3 to 6 p.m. in the Faulkner Gallery. And as I mentioned before, we expect a lot of updates on things that we've requested feedback on, including transportation and other topics. We also expect MIG, I believe, to come with a number of block-by-block schematic drawings. So if you are interested, tune in. That one will be very special, I believe. And I see Commissioner Wiscombe's light on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for that review. That was really interesting. I just wanted to just comment on Commissioner DeLuccio's report on De La Guerra Plaza, just by saying I have been one of the planning commissioners on the De La Guerra Plaza committee since its inception which was 4 years ago. Commissioner Lodge joined more recently, but it's been 4 years of committee work to get to the point of bringing it to historic landmarks a couple times and finally getting a unanimous vote to send it on for some further permitting. So I just wanted to add that it's been a long-term process. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, Commissioner Wiscombe. So if there are no other speakers, I will just move forward towards adjournment. It is now 4:10, and that concludes our August 10th Planning Commission hearing. Our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for next Thursday, that's August 17, 2023. And I wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you all for being here.